Good evening, folks, and welcome to Students for Freedom's Teach-In for Democracy. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, and thank you to those of us joining online as well. We're so excited to be here. We have an amazing lineup of organizers, academics, and activists, and we're so excited to spend an evening in community with other people who also think that America's rapid descent into authoritarianism is like maybe a bad thing. My name is Olivia Data. I'll be your MC this evening. I want to thank James and Tova, two brilliant organizers with Students for Freedom, for inviting me. I first heard about Students for Freedom when Trump's attacks on DEI at Harvard resulted in the Harvard College Women's Center being shut down. I'd worked there for a year, and I found it to be such an important community and resource for all students. The Harvard admin originally said they would not be capitulating to the Trump administration's demands, but ultimately, I guess the Women's Center just got way too politically radical with their ideas. I mean, we believed that women exist. Anyways, I was talking with James. I said, I think the work that Students for Freedom has done in mobilizing our campus in the face of democratic backsliding is just so incredible, and I support it so much, and you know, is there anything I can do to help? And he said, yeah, well, you could come to an event. And I said, I'll have to check my GCal. No, I'm kidding. I'm so honored to be here, but as I'm sure many of you feel, especially at this point in the semester, it can feel very hard to show up to things. We're busy, we're tired, anything we do as individuals seems to get lost in the daily slog of late-stage capitalist horrors, but really, these are themselves reasons why we need to keep showing up together. Whether we're talking about labor inequities here on campus, or broad democratic threats happening in Congress, our ability to organize and stand up for each other as a community is the strongest tool we have. So with that said, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please feel free to come and go as you please throughout the evening. And now, to kick off our teach-in, I'm going to hand the mic over to Students for Freedom co-chair James McCaffrey. Originally from Oklahoma City, James is a current senior studying government with a secondary in history at Harvard College. And please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Appreciate you all coming out on such a late evening. I know Friday isn't always easy, but happy to see you all. Right now we have a couple hundred people virtually also, so I want to say hi to everybody on Zoom who is zooming in, so appreciate that. But yeah, as Olivia said, my name is James, and I'm the current co-chair and one of the co-founders of Students for Freedom. We are a coalition of Harvard students fighting to ensure that Harvard continues to stand up to the Trump administration. Students for Freedom started a little over a year ago at this point when a small group of Harvard students started expressing concerns to each other about the Trump administration's actions during the first months of his presidency. We had seen the Trump administration attack Columbia University and saw them quickly cave to their demands, and we saw Tufts student Rumesa Ozturk kidnapped by ICE for an op-ed she wrote in her campus newspaper. We realized that there was no dedicated student group on campus organizing to push Harvard not to give in to the Trump administration's demands. So we decided to stand up and get to work. We began meeting in dorms, discussing what we could do to help. Our coalition grew, encompassing a wide range of students of different political beliefs and backgrounds. Our first public action was a rally on April 12th, before Harvard had responded to the Trump administration's list of demands, and the Cambridge City Council and the American Association of University Professors was organizing a public demonstration to show Harvard that the community wanted Harvard to stand up for our university's independence. Several of our members spoke out on behalf of the student body, including some international students at great personal risk. And then 2 days later, Harvard University stood up and sued the Trump administration, saying that they would reject the federal government's demands. That was April 14th. After that, things evolved rapidly. On April 15th, President Trump froze billions of dollars in funding, as many of us know. On April 16th, the Department of Homeland Security threatened to deport all of Harvard's students unless Harvard provided students private information. When Harvard didn't comply, the Department of Homeland Security revoked Harvard's authorization to host international students, stranding thousands of students until the courts paused that action. And with that, we were off to the races with a series of lawsuits, investigations, proclamations, and much more. The pressure on students has been immense this past year, but students have lost funding for research and have had to edit grants to avoid words that might flag their application, like equity or diversity, and international students have been silenced out of fear of ideological deportation. Despite these fears and struggles, we've continued organizing. We have fought hard to keep up the pressure on Harvard through open letters, op-eds, poster campaigns, pamphlets, and rallies to show Harvard that we want them to stand strong against the Trump administration's unlawful actions. Today, the fight is just as urgent as it was last year, and that was reaffirmed about a week ago. On April 15th, 2025, President Trump froze billions of dollars in funding for the first time. On April 16th, 2026, the Trump administration called on the First Circuit to reinstate the multi-billion-dollar freeze on Harvard's research funding. So this is a very active fight, and that's why we're having this event today, to keep up that pressure and keep this thing going. But this is not, however, just a story about Harvard's resistance. Harvard has also quietly given in to the Trump administration's demands. In their first letter from the Trump administration on April 11th, one of the points read, "The university must immediately shutter all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, offices, committees, positions, and initiatives, and demonstrate to the satisfaction of the federal government that these reforms are durable and effective by August 2025. In July of last year, Harvard quietly closed its Foundation for Intercultural and Race Relations, the Women's Center, and the BGLTQ office. This concession was made without any consideration for the students, like Olivia, who lost key support systems and jobs because of these changes. On top of this, we're seeing more of Harvard's failures on display as the Harvard Graduate Student Union strike ends its fourth day after talks hit a standstill on Monday. This is why it's essential for students, faculty, staff, and alumni to work together to make Harvard a better place for our community and the community beyond Harvard. We're working not just to push back against the Trump administration, but to transform our university into a more transparent, open, and courageous institution. Now, speaking of the community beyond Harvard, I think it's important to highlight that we are joined by students from several universities tonight, alongside alumni, faculty, and community members, and everybody on Zoom right now from across the country. Tonight, you'll hear from leaders, professors, and lifelong organizers about the importance of organizing, and I hope that tonight you take away two main things. First, I hope you learned something new. And second, I hope you remember that knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. So I hope you take what you learned today and apply it to make a difference in your community, whether that's joining a union, joining an alumni group, or just joining Students for Freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for giving us an amazing overview of the moment we are in now. More to talk about the challenges that we're facing and what we can do about them is Miles Rappaport. He was a member of the class of '71 and is currently the co-chair of Crimson Courage. Shout out. He has been an organizer, elected official, and democracy advocate since then. He served in the Connecticut legislature and as Secretary of the State of Connecticut and is president of Demos in Common Cause. He's now the president of 100% Democracy, and he is here to speak with us. Yes, he is. Amazing. Woohoo!
Well, I'm also delighted to be here. I'm slightly tempted to say, James, what he said. It's remarkable what a parallel story Students for Freedom and Crimson Courage have been around these issues. But I do want to really thank Students for Freedom, who have been the spearhead of tonight's event. James, Tova, Willow, and a whole crew of people have been just terrific. And I also want to thank everybody who's here from Crimson Courage, who has also done real work on making this happen. And you will hear later from Patty Nolan, who is not only a Cambridge City Councilor, but also my co-chair as Crimson Courage, about some of the activities that are planned going forward. But a little bit on the history. So that same day, April 11th and April 14th, those are kind of milestone days for Crimson Courage as well. the attack on Harvard began, we ended up with a group of people who, many of whom were not really focused on Harvard up until that point. We're doing other things. My own work has been on voting rights, voting issues, electoral reform. But when Harvard all of a sudden became the center point of the authoritarian attack by the Trump administration, I think many, many of us said, this is a moment where we need to step up. And so at that very moment, the first Zoom we had was actually before Harvard responded to the letter of April 11th. And the discussion was, how can we sort of pressure Harvard? What can we do? Can we stop our donations? Well, many of us hadn't made that many donations. But we ended up saying, okay, here are some things, and there were letters and things that we planned. Anyway, 3 days later, everything changed when Harvard decided to stand up, which we thought was amazing, and we went into action as well. We had a webinar that had actually 5,500 people sign up for it. There was an amicus brief to Harvard's suit that Crimson Courage was a part of, that over 12,000 people signed. And sooner or later, we did a forum on Alumni Day, which we're going to do again this year. And before we knew it, we had 17,000 people on our mailing list. We did stickers at the commencement. We did stickers at reunions and Alumni Day. And we generally had a real presence because I think what happened was everything had sort of hit a real nerve at that point. Anyway, we've continued to work. We've continued to grow. We've continued, as James said, to be mindful of the backsliding that Harvard has done. While we're delighted that there has been no formal settlement, and we think that that has been a real inspiration to others, we also think that the backsliding needs to be addressed and needs to be rolled back. Anyway, here we are 1 year later, and there's bad news and good news. The bad news is the authoritarian assault continues. Okay, from the Trump administration, there is nothing to suggest that they have any guardrails whatsoever, whether it's in the electoral process, whether it's in international affairs, as we will see, or whether it's on the attack on higher education. They're coming at us. I actually thought for a little while that maybe the old adage of once burned, twice shy would apply to the Trump administration and its attack on Harvard. You know, they really didn't do very well, and the compact that they tried to go national with, that didn't do very well either. So I thought, all right, maybe they'll go turn their attention elsewhere. But as James said, not to be, just this last couple of weeks, I've seen a renewed assault and a renewed attack. And one more is coming. I think Patty will talk about this a little bit later, but there clearly are moves by the Trump administration to change the accreditation process and to seriously attack the financial aid for students at Harvard and many other places. So nothing has changed when it comes to what their attitude is and what they're trying to do. But the good news is I'm actually very optimistic that the resistance in all places, but including in higher education, is growing and is beginning to kind of melt away the coalition or chip away at the coalition that Trump assembled for the 2024 elections. It's happening in the courts. It's happening in the streets. I want to do a little shout out to Indivisible, who has done fabulous work on mobilizing people against the authoritarian assault. And it's also happening nationally in terms of higher education, okay? We are delighted that Crimson Courage and Students for Freedom and other organizations on this campus are going to continue to fight. We're also happy that there's now a national higher education movement, okay? I want to do a shout out to Stand for Campus Freedom, which is a national group of alumni organizations in maybe 20 or 25 campuses around the country. Crimson Courage is part of the Emergency Campaign to Support Higher Education, which is a national effort to say no to rally people and around the accreditation fight and others around keeping ICE off campus. And there's a new outfit called the Alliance for Higher Education, which is a kind of umbrella organization for all those administrators and trustees, et cetera, who want to fight. So all this is good. I actually think there is now a genuine movement that is going to change the trajectory. We'll see what happens 6 months from now, but I really believe that, you know, that the tide is turning. I mean, some of my friends are more pessimistic than I am, but I'm more optimistic. I believe that while the authoritarians at the gate have not changed their attitude, the height of the gate, the height of the wall is increasing. And I'm optimistic that that democracy will prevail, and that higher education will actually be able then to come and look at itself and ways to improve, but outside of the purview of an attack by a right-wing authoritarian government. So I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a great night. Hello, all of you on Zoom, and I will yield back to the gentle lady from Harvard.
Thank you, Miles Rappaport. I totally agree. The tide is turning. One might even say the crimson tide. What? Stop, you're too kind. Up next, I would like to welcome to the stage Abdullah Shahid Sayal, a junior at the college and an international student from Pakistan. He served as the former co-president of the student government at Harvard College, and he became involved with Students for Freedom and student organizing during Trump's attacks on Harvard.
Thank you so much for the incredibly kind introduction. I really want to acknowledge that I'm really happy to be here. It's an honor to speak in front of such an incredible audience. At the same point, I want to make it very clear that my experience is absolutely nothing compared to the speakers who came before me and the ones who will come after me. So I'm in no position to recommend change of any sort, but I'm very happy to have this platform to share my experience with Students for Freedom and what's going to happen in the next few years. So again, with a ton of humility, I want to first talk about how Students for Freedom began. Again, Tova and James had incredible roles, but for me, it started at, I think it was early in April. It was like 1-ish a.m., just like every college student does. I was at a party on a Saturday night, and I met one of my good friends who I talked properly in my freshman year. His name was Carly. He's right now he's doing a semester abroad in Oxford. But he came up to me, and in the middle of loud music, I could barely hear him. He was like, "Oh, like Trump is doing this to Harvard right now. What do you want to do?" I was like, I didn't vote for him. A, I can't vote here. But B, even if I could, I'm not sure if you're in any position to do much stuff. Again, as what was said earlier, I think he was far more optimistic than I was. He was like, "You know what? We should start something." We didn't have a name at that point. I was like, "Okay, I'm more than happy to. Maybe this is not the best place to do so, but let's meet tomorrow." And then the next day, I think I met Tova, I met James, I met a ton of other people in this room in Leverett. And I think that's where everything began. I think a few days later, Tova and James agreed on a name. I think if I'm not wrong, that it was very haphazard because we just needed a name to start a rally, and they were like, "Okay, how do we come up with a name?" And people started opening ChatGPT, and a bunch of other AI models started searching up names, and in the end, somewhat we agreed on Students for Freedom. But I also want to acknowledge Tova's and James's contribution the initial days, and also Carly's. I hope he's somewhere up there listening to us. But they were absolutely instrumental in the place we are at right now. As was said earlier, I myself am an international student. I spent almost my entire life in Lahore, in Pakistan. And I grew up with, I wouldn't say similar to what's happening here right now, but I would say it was a relatively authoritarian regime since the beginning of 2004. We had one military dictator during my lifetime as well in Pakistan. So my family and we grew up seeing the absolute worst of what an authoritarian regime could do. You are extremely civically disengaged. You don't go to protests anymore. Your family is also extremely pessimistic about doing everything here. So when the Students for Freedom was formed, and as was said earlier, on April 12th, we had this rally. I think Tova and James very kindly asked me that I should speak there. I was like, yeah, I don't have much to say, and B, there's a possibility. And again, I want to contextualize this really well. At that point, people were extremely fearful of speaking out, especially if you weren't a citizen. You saw the mass ostrich story. You saw what happened with tons of students outside of Harvard as well. So for me, I was a sophomore at that point. I didn't learn much until then. So there were still 2 more years to go. And for me, it was, I had to weigh completing my degree at Harvard versus possibly, not possibly, definitely doing the right thing. So I talked to my parents, first of all. And my parents were like, oh, there are two sides to this. First, if you get deported, the good thing is we can get to see you soon. That's good. B, if it's not, you clearly spend a ton of time going to Harvard and applying, and we obviously want you to get a degree in the end. And I think in the end, my father did step in, and he said that he knew, like, he truly, I've always found him to be an extremely principled man. I don't think he's close to being pragmatic. So he was like, you should do whatever you feel is right. And the next day, I told Tova that, you know what, I will go in. I didn't have much to say there, but I had a really good friend who, he's actually right here, Jack. I asked him, I was like, I don't know what to say there. And he just, I just stood at the protest, I think gave bits and pieces of what was happening. And then there was this one line which Jack helped me write. I'll read it out. So it was, quote unquote, I didn't travel 5,000 miles all the way from Pakistan to not step 5 feet out of my dorm. And the next day I woke up, and all of my friends from back home at college started sharing screenshots or like clips of me on national television where that line was being repeated. I was like, wow, I don't think I would have an impact of this sort. I'm not sure if it changed anything, but it definitely put the news out there. The students definitely were against what was happening at Harvard. Extremely, extremely thankful to Jack. I don't think I could have come up, I could have made anything close to that myself. But I think for me, the biggest thing which Students of Freedom was able to accomplish was building an umbrella organization under which it doesn't really matter what your other political views are. As long as you're against higher education being used and weaponized the way President Trump intended to do so, you're part of us. And I think it manifested in the perfect manner on May 27th. And there's this really cool New York Times article written about it as well. But for some context, we had an incredibly divided and polarized campus during my freshman year. So this is in 2023 to 24. This is at the height of protests on campus with a lot of pro-Palestine activism and then also the encampment. And I myself, with my own eyes, saw that people just wouldn't talk to each other if they had differing views over the Israel-Palestine issue. And when I met Carly, I think one of the key things we talked about was we need to bridge this divide. Everyone doesn't, obviously 2 people can never have the exact same values or political opinions on everything, that's for sure. But B, I think uniting for higher education in defense of Harvard, in defense of a bunch of other stuff against such an authoritarian assault is something which most people will tend to agree to. And I think building that bridge was something which Students of Freedom did a fantastic job on. So on May 27th, again, big kudos to Tova, James, Jack, and a bunch of other people. They were able to bring in the ex-president of Harvard Hillel, which is a leading Jewish organization on campus, and one of a big pro-Palestinian organizer, Nuriel, who lied on the opposite ends of the spectrum on the Israel-Palestine issue. And they introduced each other at the protest. And I think that headline on New York Times was how Trump managed to heal Harvard, how Trump managed to heal a deeply divided Harvard. And I don't think there was any other occasion where that could have happened. Like within a year of the encampment, we saw both of those people introduce each other. Probably the most beautiful moment I've experienced during my time at Harvard, probably till the time I graduate. And I don't think that would have happened without President Trump's, again, assault on Harvard. Not that that's a good thing, but I definitely think that Students of Freedom was able to ignite that flame. I think the question now is, and now I want to move on a bit from just these stories, is one might argue there are 2 main schools of thought. So that Trump's attacks on Harvard have lightened a bit and you can't do much. And there is a second school of thought that even though they have lightened on let's say, national television or the press, you still see Harvard backing down a lot. As was said earlier, they closed down the Women's Center, they closed down a ton of other stuff, and I'm sure people can list down everything that was done. So I think the impact is probably far worse than it was last year because our daily lives have been impacted by the pressure that Trump has placed on us. And I think at this point, it is extremely, extremely important to institutionalize these resistance fronts because, I mean, everyone knows that this fight is far bigger than me, it's far bigger than you, it's far bigger than the professors, it's far bigger than Harvard itself. And I would argue it's far bigger than even President Trump because Trump is here for, I don't know, the next 3 years. You can definitely have someone else pop up. And higher education should be resistant enough and resilient enough to sustain any of such attacks for a long, long amount of time. Harvard has stood here for 400 years. I hope it stands for 400 more. Actually, I hope it stands for 1,000 more. It is, and I think stuff like Crimson Courage and Students for Freedom need to be institutionalized properly. The reason I say that is because, I mean, Tova and James are going to graduate, and Jack as well this semester, and we need a good transition of leadership. And I'm assuming, and I hope so, that all the people from Crimson Courage have already graduated, so we can't do much there. But I think the entire idea here is that if these institutions remain for a good amount of time, I think we can take up this fight. And I completely agree with what Miles said earlier. I think I'm far more optimistic than most people here, but I think we've been doing well as the students, as the community of Harvard. But I do, at the same point, believe that Harvard has been betraying its mission. I think, and again, people can have differing views here, that Harvard took a stance last year because it happened to be politically convenient. The reason I say that is because, I mean, sending out those big emails with the italicized font and how Harvard is standing up to, you know, a dictator who, not a dictator, but like maybe an authoritarian figure who everyone has been hating, looks really good. But when it actually starts having an impact on you, on a financial point, you back down, you stop issuing those statements. And I want Harvard to stand up, not because it's politically convenient or because the calculus of the benefits versus the cost is in our favor. I want Harvard to stand up because it's the right thing to do. I want Harvard to stand up because higher education does, in fact, rest on Harvard's shoulders. I think if we capitulate, we are definitely going to see every other institution in the same area also capitulate. I think at this point it's very, very important to support every single organization that has been encouraging Harvard to do the right thing, which also includes the Harvard Graduate Students Union, which is on a strike, and they have been on they're on their 4th day right now. I was a bit, when I saw that the event was at the Science Center, I was like, oh, I have to cross the picket line. But I'm happy that I think it ends at 4 p.m. So I was able to come in very, very easily. But I think at the same point, standing up against authoritarianism doesn't just include standing up against Trump. And institutionalizing these in places like Crimson Courage and Students of Freedom is incredibly key. And in my capacity, and I know I've been taking too much of my time, so I'll be pretty quick here. I think we've tried to do a bunch of stuff. Well, I was the co-president of the Harvard Undergraduate Association, which is a student government. And one of the big issues we faced was that if we stood up against the administration, we were also financially dependent on them for pretty much anything. So we tried to start a fund which allows student activities to be somewhat independent of the funding which Harvard is able to provide. And thankfully enough, we had some incredible support from our fantastic alumni. One of them was, in fact, in Crimson Courage. Ian Simmons, he was able to give us our first donation, which allowed us to start the fund. And now we have a fund which is independent of the college, and hopefully, in a few years' time, it's big enough that activities on campus and activism on campus is not financially dependent on what the university is able to provide to us. So I'm incredibly grateful to Crimson Courage, all of its members, and thank you so much for giving me this platform to speak. And now I'll let the capable speakers to come and take the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your courage in speaking out as well. It was at one of the first Students for Freedom protests that I attended, and I'm about to blatantly plagiarize someone's words in the room, I'm sure. But I heard a quote that stuck with me, which is that Harvard will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. We're back in the trying everything else stage, but we have hope we'll get back to the do the right thing stage soon enough. With that, it is my honor to introduce a presentation from Professor Cornell Brooks. Cornell William Brooks is a Hauser Professor of the Practice of Nonprofit Organizations and Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership. And I'm realizing how many words there are in these titles. I'm going to let you read them off the screen. They're very impressive. Professor Brooks is, in fact, so deeply devoted to advocacy that we don't even mind that he got his JD at Yale Law School. He served as president and CEO of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. He is also the former president and CEO of the NAACP, serving from 2014 to 2017. Among the many demonstrations from Ferguson to Flint during his tenure, he conceived and led America's Journey for Justice, marched from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C., over 40 days and 1,000 miles. Professor Brooks is also a civil rights attorney and an ordained minister, and we're so grateful to have him speak with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Good evening. Now, maybe if I were at Yale Law School, that good evening would suffice, but since I'm here at Harvard, good evening. Good evening. So let me just begin with a word of appreciation to Students for Freedom and Crimson Courage. Having organized demonstrations around the country and abroad, I realize that the work that goes into bringing people together, inspiring people to have courage, is an act of commitment, it's an act of resolve, it's an act of resistance. And so if you think it not robbery, I ask that you put your hands together loud, long, and resoundingly for yourselves. We're convening this teach-in in what feels for many like a midnight hour of our democracy. It is a moment in which all across the length and breadth of this country and around the globe, people are fearful, they're trepidatious, they're anxious, they're frightened, they are afraid. When you have students who walk out of their dormitory rooms and appreciate the fact that they could be kidnapped, taken from the streets, that we have immigrants who may be deported without due process to prisons abroad, to places they've never been, to countries that they've never visited. When we have a nation in which ethnicity and race have been weaponized, when we live in a country at a time in which anti-Semitism has been weaponized, Islamophobia has been ignored, and xenophobia has been stoked. This is a moment in which we have a group of students and alumni who thought it the right thing to do, to stand in the lineage and the legacy of Septima Clark, to teach, to instruct, to inspire, to bring people together, to stand up and stand against this autocracy day in and day out until it comes down. So we're not here to engage in a polite exchange of ideas, because we're not in a place, we're not in a space where this is a matter that can be solved by civility. This is not a matter of disagreeing better. This is a matter of standing up and standing against autocracy. Now, as a matter of humility, I want to extend a word of appreciation, particularly to students, because I know what it's like as a student to study hard, to try to do all the things that students are sent, or I should say, come to college, come to university, come to graduate school to do, and then try to make your country better, to make your community better. I know what that is like, and I know that I know a little something about the risks that are taken. Having graduated from Boston University, Jackson State University, and Yale Law School, and having been almost thrown out of 2 of those institutions because of my protests. So I appreciate the risks. Now, I'm here to just lift up a few words about autocracy. I don't begin with the assumption that everyone believes that we're facing the threat of autocracy. I recall well a panel at the Harvard Kennedy School where some of my colleagues thought that we were certainly in a democratically perilous state, but not necessarily facing autocracy. So I want to make the case that we are in fact facing an autocracy that is not unrelated to the racialized regional autocracy of the South. But the autocracy we face in this moment is a multiracial, racialized autocracy. And what I mean by that is there are those who assume that the greatest lessons to be learned from autocracies come from abroad. Italy under Mussolini, Spain under Franco, Germany under Hitler. But the scholar James Q. Whitman of Yale Law School reminds us that the legal architects of Nazi Germany studied the miscegenation and Jim Crow laws of the United States. Those who planned to kill 11 million Jews studied the laws of this United States. They studied how we segregate. They studied how we subjugate. They studied how we oppress. And so it is a matter of not merely looking abroad for lessons of resistance and resilience, but looking at our own history. And so when we think about some of the features of autocracy, on the eve of this 250th anniversary of our country, I'm thinking of scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois, Eddie Glaude, certainly Eric Foner. When I think about autocracy as a matter of the concentration of power, weakened civil liberties and civil rights, less free and unfair elections, and the use of coercion. And so when I think about the concentration of power, I think about not merely President Trump operating under a theory of a unitary executive hatched by Project 25 and the Heritage Foundation. I think about not only DOGE shuttering federal agencies. I think about not only the unemployment rate for black women skyrocketing up 1% in a matter of weeks. I think about not only federal employees turned out into the streets. I think about not only Congress ostensibly having the power of expenditure, while the president seems to have the power to exterminate, to eliminate federal agencies in contravention of American laws and the U.S. Constitution. I think about not only that, but I also think about black folk, 4 million of whom were enslaved in this country, who operated under an autocracy that was known as slavocracy, plantation bosses. I think about the constraint of their civil liberties, the constraint of their civil rights. So I think about my forebears in the low country of South Carolina who could not vote, who could not serve on juries, who could not use public accommodations. I think about the ways in which their lives were constrained. And I think about the ways in which our lives are constrained. And I understand that that regional racial autocracy of the Deep South is being replicated in the present. Oh, there's someone here who may be skeptical. Well, let us think about the grand unifying theory of this autocratic regime under which we live that has stoked racism and ethnocentrism day in and day out. How is it that this administration threatens to send people to the same, and forgive the language here, shithole countries that they disdain? How is it that they can shutter DEI programs ostensibly following the affirmative action decision held unlawful, held unconstitutional, the use of affirmative actions in admissions? It did not bar graduation celebrations by black students, or Jewish students, or Muslim students, or women students. But somehow we have to gather with money raised and given by alumni to celebrate these happy moments in the lives of students. We've seen over and over and over again racism stoked. How is it that we have a Muslim man? We wake up one day and all of a sudden, one of the world's greatest religions, one of the world's largest communities, we have them targeted, threatened with deportation. How is that possible? How is it possible that we have Christians encouraged to hate Muslims, Muslims encouraged to hate Jews, Israelis encouraged to hate Palestinians, all of us encouraged to hate one another? How is it that we have frivolous, constitutionally fraudulent litigation, ostensibly based on anti-Semitism at Harvard, where the lawyers have not deigned to step foot on this campus, read the reports, interview the witnesses, or do a damn thing about anti-Semitism? How is that possible? And they encourage us day in and day out to fight one another, to hate one another. It's racism. It's discrimination. It's xenophobia. When we think about the attack on civil liberties, we have to, of course, talk about academic freedom. And by academic freedom, I need to be very clear here. I support the Harvard litigation. I believe greatly in the Harvard litigation. I believe that it was the right thing to do. But academic freedom cannot be the freedom of professors to teach what they want to teach without students being able to protest what they want to protest. How is it? I can have a former student stand silently in the library of one of the world's greatest law schools, the Harvard Law School, and hold up a sign silently and be banned from the Harvard Law Library for life with her professor. I would argue, as a civil rights lawyer of some 30 years, that if you pulled any random book on the Constitution from the shelf and held it up, it would be the moral, legal, and constitutional equivalent of that protest. That is where we are. We are litigating in court and under-litigating on campus. Less free and less fair elections. We have in the great state of Texas, where I was born, in El Paso, at Fort Bliss. Fort Bliss, the same place where they're now detaining immigrants. Fort Bliss, the same place where they once detained Japanese Americans, detained as interned, as incarcerated. That same Fort Bliss. Texas is the place where now they've literally set off this kind of Machiavellian frenzy of gerrymandering in this country from one end of the country to the other. And so here we are, we have less free, less democratic elections. How so? We have rampant voter suppression in the wake of Shelby versus Holder. We have less representative democracy. And here we are on this campus, literally enduring all of this. Coercion. Let's be very clear here. We're living under a violent threat, right? So in other words, where we have the U.S. Border Patrol, ICE being deployed against citizens and immigrants alike without any reference to the Constitution, where we have Renee Good killed in cold blood and on camera. Alex Priete, killed in cold blood and on camera. Where we have literally all across this country police acting under the tacit permission of the White House to arrest anybody for any reason without due process, without probable cause, and subject them to any treatment. The racial profiling that used to make the news on a near daily basis is now being carried out against a multiracial cast of characters, otherwise informally known as citizens. This is where we are. But I just want to leave you with a few words of hope. I might call these family stories of autocracy. I'm reminded that the former president of Harvard, Larry Bacow, signed on and initiated litigation opposing the Muslim ban, not unlike the current president of Harvard, Alan Garber. But the one thing that struck me about the former president of Harvard, when he reached out to the president of MIT to join forces in litigation against this Muslim ban, the former president of Harvard didn't talk about the litigation purely in constitutional terms. He connected the legal litigatory narrative to his personal narrative, to his family story. He talked about the Muslim ban as a son of the Holocaust. That gives me permission to talk about this present autocratic moment in terms of my own family history. And so I think of my mother, who in 1960 on the campus of South Carolina State University, she was only a little younger than many of you here, 16 years old, 4 inches shorter than I am, about 30 or 40 pounds lighter, a not particularly large woman. She faced a fire hose, which ripped the coat off her back, slammed her onto the sidewalk, and she found herself in a cattle pen, like a cow, like a farm animal, because the jails were filled. Some 300 students at South Carolina State College protested. They demonstrated. They were thrown in jail for their opposition to segregation in public accommodations. There's a little lesson in this story that I think is applicable to students here at Harvard. My mother was charged, and so many other students, with disturbance of the peace. But as it turns out, the students organized consulting with the lawyers, which is to say they were on the sidewalk 2 by 2. And so as the case made its way from the federal district court to the U.S. Court of Appeals and ultimately to the Supreme Court, over and over the court said the students weren't disturbing the peace, they were processing, they were walking. And so the lesson of the story here is that we have to be strategic. We have to be thoughtful. We have to literally plan our protest to protect our people. Can I say that twice? Now, when we have students who are doxxed and having their parents doxxed, when we have students operating under physical threat, some of us have to think about the geography of our courage. Where do we choose to be courageous? Is it at the front of the line? At the back of the line? Do you write a letter, an op-ed, or do you protest? If your visa, if your immigration papers are not in order, you choose when and where strategically to demonstrate your courage. There's no cowardice in being fearful, as to say, in being thoughtful. There's no cowardice in being strategic. There's no cowardice in standing together and protecting one another. Just a story of autocracy. Another story of autocracy. Back in 1876, my 5th great-grandfather, when he was a teenager, only a little older than my mother, a woman by the name of Harriet Tubman, who delivered 70 people to freedom on the Underground Railroad. When she went south into South Carolina as the first woman leading U.S. troops into battle, she delivered 700 people to freedom. My great-great-great-grandfather was liberated in that raid. Years later, in 1876, he's leading a protest. He's leading a demonstration. He's leading a strike for higher wages. Does that sound familiar to anybody right about now? For the formerly enslaved who were then harvesting rice in the low country of South Carolina. He found himself in jail. But guess what? Formerly enslaved folks surrounded the jail. They surrounded the jail and demanded my great-grandfather and others be freed from jail. So much so that the segregationist, racist governor of South Carolina pardoned him and his colleagues. What am I suggesting here? That when we stand together, when we stand strong, when we look out for one another, when we act as family, right? This is a moment where professors can't merely be professors. Students can't merely be students. We have to look out for one another as though we were blood, as though we were kin, as though we were related. Somebody's saying here, well, Professor Brooks, we don't look alike. Well, let me share something with you. In my family, our color and complexion ranges from alabaster to jet black. We come in all colors as a consequence of rape and resilience. But one of the things I've come to the firm conclusion is that we don't have to all look alike to act alike. We don't have to all look alike to stand together, to look out for one another, to protect one another. We don't have to all look alike to exercise the same measure of courage, the same measure of integrity. We don't have to all look alike in order to stand together in this moment. Now, let's be clear here. I ask that you all not repeat this beyond this room. There are professors and administrators who they need some crimson courage right about now. We have professors. I'll count myself in that school. We have professors and administrators who have to be told that what you're doing is the right thing, or that what you're doing is not enough of the right thing, and that what you're doing is the wrong thing. We as a university, and we need to be clear here, Harvard is not a venture capital fund masquerading as a university. Harvard is an institution that was ostensibly started as a seminary for Native Americans. As misguided as a theological adventure as that was, it does suggest to us that as a university, we have a calling. I don't necessarily mean in a religious sense, but I believe that people can be historically, circumstantially, and situationally called. And so in this moment, you are circumstantially, you are situationally, you are historically called for such a time as this. In this autocratic hour, we're called to be brave. We're called to be courageous. We're called to stand up. We're called to stand together. We're called to be family. So anytime one of these professors goes off script, anytime one of these administrators talk about, well, this donor may be mad, this donor may be unhappy, we're not sure of our litigation position, there's certain known and unknown risks, we have to remind people, why are we here? What have we been called to do? In this moment, I'll simply end with this. A few years ago, I recall sitting on the platform at graduation and looking up on the platform, and there was a man I deeply admired by the name of John Lewis. We all applauded him, gave him an honorary degree as an elder statesman, conscience of the Congress. Many forgot that he started his civil rights career as a high school student, then a college student, then a seminary student. We forget the fact that he led in the ways that you are in fact leading. And so I want to suggest that we not give honorary degrees to those who are doing what our students are doing now without supporting what our students are doing now. And lastly, I'll leave you with this note on Harriet Tubman. You recall that Harriet Tubman delivered 70 people to freedom on the Underground Railroad. 700 people she delivered to freedom in the low country of South Carolina. But had Harriet Tubman compared the less than 800 people she freed to the 4 million people who were enslaved, she might have and should have given up. But I want to suggest to you that hope is not empirically demonstrated. It is morally chosen. We choose to be helpful and hopeful. We choose to be powerful. We choose to resist. We're not merely counting up the number of lawsuits we win. We're not merely counting up the number of people who are online. We're not merely counting the number of donors who support Harvard or don't support Harvard. We're counting our resolve. We're counting our courage. We're counting our determination. We're counting on the fact that there are those who are coming after us who are depending on us. Crimson courage.
Thank you so much. Let's give it up one more time for Professor Brooks. Up next, here to speak to us about some ways that we can get involved in supporting our community members, we have Luce. Luce is a coalition of immigrant-led grassroots organizations who build people power for everyone across Massachusetts. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, okay. Wait, what? Can this also be disconnected? Sure. Yeah, I'm just going to do that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sal. This is Alexis. We are two of the coordinators of the Harvard Luce Hub. Just for a brief overview, Luce is a Massachusetts-wide, statewide immigrant justice network that has been really developed out over the last calendar year or so in order to fill a variety of gaps that are being not met by our institutions and by the state. I will say for the Harvard Luce Hub in particular, when we started our hub in, I think, December of 2024, we were one of the earliest Luce Hubs to be created. And we were created by a group of organizers who organize across racial justice issues. Our organizers participated very actively in the leadership of the encampment. They participate very actively in anti-policing organizing, in the BLM protests across the country that occurred in 2020. We are a group of organizers that are firmly committed to racial justice and liberation across a variety of movements. We center abolition and the belief that there is no such thing as a good or a bad immigrant. There is no such thing as a person who should be put in a cage. There is no such thing as a person who should be sent outside of a country on the basis of the color of their skin or their nationality or where they were born or how many children they have or whether or not they have broken the law. Our priority, consistently and across all of our issues as the Luce Harvard Hub, is to support immigrants and to support migrants and to support everybody who's experiencing ongoing state violence. We were created prior to the inauguration of Donald Trump for the second time. We were created at a moment where the country was deeply divided, but people seemed to be more okay with it because a Democrat was in the White House. We stand firmly behind people who are being oppressed. We are not here to say simply that Donald Trump is the source of the problems that exist in this country or exist globally. We are here to address the ongoing issues of intense and and unacceptable state violence and repression that our community members have been experiencing for much longer than the last year and a half.
Okay, so I see the 2-minute timer, so I'm gonna be quick with this. So if you guys want to get involved, our number one rule is we do not contact police. So if you want to engage at all with Luce or get involved, we are anti-police, we are strictly abolitionists. You do not call the police if you call the Luce hotline. So I like to get that out of the way. That number up there, you should all take out your phones, save that in your phones right now if you don't have it. That is the Luce hotline. So when you see ICE or when you see somebody you think looks like an ICE officer, if they're vested and masked, and we usually like to say the three-letter vest. So there's AFT, there's DHS. Anyone with a 3-letter vest has been either ICE or working with ICE. Call this number, we will send out our verifiers. So what this means is we have trained people on this campus and around the community to go verify ICE reports. We've trained them how to identify ICE, how to interact with ICE, and how to make sure that we can keep our community safe without the use of police. So if you see ICE, sorry, I'm pointing to here because I see it. If you see ICE, please do call this number and we will dispatch out our verifiers. I don't think we have the other slide. That's fine. We submitted our slides late, so we got the one.
Oh, we do have our other side.
Oh, we have the other side. Great. Thanks, team. So this is some of our Luce work. And for context, we also are organizers with HGSU. We're both graduate students and organized with a bunch of other organizations. But this is largely what we've been doing. So our hotline, so if you call to report a suspected ICE sighting, we will dispatch people out and report it back to the community. If you guys are not already in our ICE Watch chats, we have several thousand-person group chats where we report out those tips. What's been happening is there's been a lot of rumors of ICE on campus that are most definitely not ICE, mostly construction workers and transit police. That caused a lot of panic in our community, which we do not want. So you call us instead, we verify it, and we'll dispatch out and tell you if it is ICE, and if it is, how you can get in contact with resources and where you can go or where you can stay away from. So our verifier hubs, that's us, we're the hub leads. There's hubs all around Massachusetts, including Boston, but also Western Mass. Our Know Your Rights, we've also been doing Know Your Rights trainings. So if anybody's interested, if you're in a department or if you're in a program, if you're not even a Harvard affiliate, we will do Know Your Rights trainings. We've done some that have been tailored to different departments and their needs. And then direct support. So we do fundraising support for fees and legal costs. A lot of Harvard students are very concerned about their legal expenses. And we've been seeing legal retainers from $5,000 to up to $14,000. And so we have been helping and raising mutual aid for those expenses. Also facilitating connections to legal support. So right now we're in a time where immigration lawyers are sparse, and there are also a lot of predatory immigration lawyers. So if you have concerns, if you're getting lawyers with big retainers and you're concerned about whether they're going to represent you properly, come to us. We're happy to connect you with lawyers that we know do a great job and have great representation. And then advocacy to push the university to take action. We meet with HIO, HRI, OLER, the Office of Labor and Employee Relations, sorry, I should do acronyms, Harvard International Office, Harvard Representation Initiative, and the Office of Labor and Employee Relations. We meet with all of them to try to push both our contract language on non-citizen issues. So right now, there's a HGSU strike. One of the main strike points is non-citizen issues. The university has recently, we're also both on the HGSU bargaining committee, the university has recently struck all of our language on ICE off campus, including the constitutional protection to request a judicial warrant before entering a private space. So we've continued advocacy around that. We've continued advocacy with HIO to make sure students can get resources and to try to bolster the financial resources for non-citizen students. So if you want to get involved, we don't have a QR code. We have a link tree. It's linktree/ISWG_HGSU. Or come find one of us. We're in like every group chat on the planet. So if you're in it, my little signal chat is a shark. I'm Alexis. This is Sal. Find one of us, and we're happy to get you connected. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you so much to Luce for presenting and for the work you do. Up next, I am so happy to invite to the stage Professor Theda Skocpol, the Victor S. Thomas Professor of Government and Sociology at Harvard. Over the last 3 decades, her research has primarily focused on healthcare reform, public policy, and civic engagement amidst the shifting inequalities in American democracy. Recent books she has authored or co-authored are The Tea Party and the Remaking of Republican Conservatism, Rust Belt Union Blues. Is this strange to have me read in front of you? No. Amazing.
But you don't have to read them all.
That sounds good, but I would love to because they're amazing titles. Why working class voters are turning away from the Democratic Party. And at Harvard this spring, Professor Scotchpole is teaching seminars on inequality and American democracy, and with Professor Daniel Ziblatt on democratic backsliding in the United States and beyond. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here with the young and seasoned people who have been fighting for American democracy for a long time. And we're in a university where I think the last crisis of the magnitude that the United States, and because the United States' place in the world, much of the world faces, happened very viscerally, and that was the Civil War. And those of you who haven't visited Memorial Hall should go there to see the courage that many people at this university exemplified, fighting and often losing their lives, not just for the Union, but for, in many cases, consciously and deliberately for the abolition of slavery in this country. Generations face challenges that are outside of their control, and all of us alive right now face a period of profound threat and frightening crisis for accountable government in the United States, one of the most severe in U.S. history. I'm not going to say democracy because the United States has never fully realized democracy, but a predicate for the full realization of a multiracial democracy is accountable government, and that is very much at stake right now. I'll just say quickly that the crisis we're in has been developing for years, and I see it as a coming together of movements by mega billionaires trying to twist American government to their own rapacious purposes and corrupt purposes, coming together with the rise of public officials. It's not just Donald Trump and his family, but many others who are engaged in the most blatant kinds of patrimonial corruption, which is the oldest form of ruler corruption in the world. It's not new. It's creating a system in which the ruler can hand out punishments and rewards according to personal loyalty and enrichment of the ruler, his family, and his associates. And that, in turn, goes hand in hand with a minority and yet potent popular movement that is genuinely a popular movement. It is not the creation of the other two forces. It is being used by those other two forces. And that is a movement based on fear and resentment against racial, generational, and immigration trends in the United States that in the minds of many of those who are fearfully organized and willing to use violence and threats of violence threatens their sense of what is truly American. So we're in an emergency moment, and it's particularly frightening because the rulers at hand have found a way to create an unaccountable secret police force, which I have to admit I didn't even anticipate, even though I've studied revolutions, and I know that the core of state power is coercive power. They have created ICE as an unaccountable police force. It's on the verge of being funded without being reformed for the rest of Donald Trump's time in office. We are not in a parliamentary system where failed rulers can be replaced quickly, so this regime is with us for another 2.5 years. And it is also backed up by an utter perversion of the agencies of federal legal enforcement. Despite all of this, there are some very hopeful signs. I had the privilege last week to visit Minnesota. I go there regularly, and I had a chance on this occasion to meet with a dozen or so people who were familiar with what happened in the federal government attack on the state of Minnesota, which I believe they thought was going to be easy. They were kidding themselves. They didn't know what they were about to come up against. And to hear graphically the kinds of things that happened and the remarkable community-based as well as politically led response to those federal attacks. It is in fact the case that citizens and non-citizens alike were seized out of their cars or in churchyards or at schoolyards delivering their children to school or teaching in daycare centers. It is of course true that multiple people were attacked violently and 2 of them killed in full public view. This was meant to spread terror, and I was told that in fact people were very frightened. The day that Renee Good was killed, I was told hundreds and hundreds of people went for training that very night in the constitutional protection procedures and videographing procedures that had gotten her killed that day. And it wasn't because they were not worried. People believed, I was told, that others would be killed, and of course another was killed before long. But they went anyway. And this came out of what I would call a laterally networked set of neighborly and community responses. Church congregations, synagogues, mosques, school parent communities, neighborhoods, people who were willing to play a variety of kinds of roles, some simply delivering food or taking children to school, others going out on the streets. And I think there's a lesson in all of that, because what we need in this time is a lot of connections across divides, a lot of preparation to respond strategically and in smart ways to whatever the threat turns out to be, not simply to pour into the streets to protest, although that's part of it. But that wasn't the main part of it here. Weeks and weeks and weeks of pushing back, videographing, getting the word out nationally. They defeated the worst of what ICE had to offer for everyone. And now they have turned to election protection, getting ready to monitor precinct-level voting places and to make sure that immigrant citizens and citizens of color, all of whom were people taken out of their cars randomly, will be able to vote, despite what they expect to be another series of federally launched attacks on voter access to the polls. I will say that I also expect a full court press to subvert the fair counting of the elections. So I don't want to suggest that all is smooth. I think this regime is profoundly unpopular and becoming more so every day. But the more it becomes unpopular, the more the people right around Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself are going to resort to more and more extreme and dangerous tactics. So we have to be prepared for that. Now, I'm going to finally say something about Harvard. I actually don't think the moment we're in right now is mainly about Harvard. I don't want to shock all of you. I went to Michigan State University, so I've been here for a long time, and I love Harvard. I have the highest regard for it, and I'm very proud to be part of resisting and asking our university to stand up. But I think this is a time for Harvard students and Harvard affiliates of all kind and alumni to be out there thinking about building those broader connections across communities, especially through this pivotal election, which is just going to be a turning point. It is not going to be the end, where any non-MAGA candidate is good enough to elect, frankly, anyone. So last summer, I'll leave you with this, I was part of a group, a smaller group than the larger group of Harvard faculty who sent a letter to President Garber. I regularly send my views to President Garber. I send them privately. And I try to encourage him when he does the right thing, because I think we can't just bash people. And I believe that he has turned out to have more courage than I would have expected, frankly. I had low expectations going in. And I think he's done some of the right things. I think it's very difficult for Harvard to make a deal with this competitive sycophancy, this corrupt patrimonial regime, because every time Harvard gets ready to make some kind of deal, competitive forces inside the Trump administration move the goalposts. So I'm not as worried about some big deal. I don't think that's going to be likely. But I do worry that all of us here at Harvard keep our eye on the bottom lines of things that must not be compromised, must not even be relabeled. If they relabel the DEI office but keep the functions and keep the employees, and I don't know whether that's true, but that's what I would be asking. However, the bottom lines are the university must not cede to any outside forces and the authority to appoint key leaders. It must not cede authority over faculty hiring or student admissions. And that includes individualized data about any of those things, because the minute the individualized data is released, you've unleashed 25 years of lawsuits. And that's the point. This is a regime that works between official power and popular pressure from the right. Basic values of academic freedom mean that the scholarly content of courses, programs, and research endeavors must be decided by the colleagues that are in charge at any given time. Now, those colleagues are going to be changed. Administrators change those. But they can be changed back later. However, the principle of control of content is central to academic freedom. And in any financial settlements that might be negotiated, I'm reading from our letter, and this was a letter sent by people who disagree about a lot of the issues that have riven the campus in recent years. Even disagree about whether there should be any agreements with the Trump administration. In any financial settlements that might be negotiated, if money is promised, for example, for community programs or worker education, there must be absolute control that that's what the money is spent for. All of these principles are fundamental. And if Harvard holds out for them, I don't think there'll ever be a deal. But if the deal was window dressing around these principles, we could live to fight another day. And meanwhile, we should be fighting outside the university. We should be building ties beyond the university. Because most Americans who have the right to vote do not agree with what's going on, and we must work with them, not in place of them, and not simply for them, with them, to protect access to fair elections, to throw the bums out, and fair counting of the elections when the bums are thrown out.
Thank you so much, Professor Scotchpole. Up next, I would like to welcome Professor Alex Kesar, the Matthew W. Sterling Jr. Professor of History and Social Policy. Professor Kesar is a historian of labor by training, but in recent decades has written and taught about the history of democracy with a focus on the U.S. Just kidding. We switched to him. Okay, I revoke my just kidding. I was just kidding about the just kidding. Professor Kesar, in recent decades, has written and taught about the history of democracy with a focus on the U.S. A few of his books include The Right to Vote, The Contested History of Democracy in the United States, and Why Do We Still Have the Electoral College, which I, as someone from North Dakota, I often ask that question. And this book was named 2020 Book of the Year by the New Statesman. We're thrilled to have him speak with us today. Let's welcome him to the stage.
I think I'm going to be able to cut some of my comments short because I agree with just about everything that Theda said in her talk, and she covered some of the same ground. But first, I want to thank the organizers who put this event together and invited me to speak. And I stand here as an alum, a faculty member, and as mentioned, as a historian of democracy. And it's really in that last role, it's that last role that shapes the remarks, the brief remarks that I want to make today, because, I mean, as everyone has noted, our democracy is indeed under threat, not for the first time, but I think this is the most severe threat that we have faced since the Civil War. And I want to make a couple different kinds of comments about patterns in the history of democracy in the United States, and we'll also, I may use the terms democracy in the United States, but I also share Theda's view that there have been patterns of ups and downs, and I'm going to talk about that. We've never quite gotten to really being democratic, but at times we've moved closer. And part of the key, I think, that we need to think about as we think about the present moment. I mean, the mandate that I was given was to try to locate the moment that we are in. But that the history of democracy and of political institutions is not a history of unchanging institutions in the United States or of unchanging values. It's a history of surges forward in democratization with the expansion of political rights and social rights, followed by periods of contraction, of reactions against democracy and against inclusiveness. One need only think of the most obvious example that we do learn about in our high school American history courses, although I'm not sure if that's true in high school history courses in the South. Having taught in the South for a number of years, I had a number of students who still thought that the War of Northern Aggression was something to be repudiated. But one can think of the advances that were made during Reconstruction with the constitutional amendments, the 14th and the 15th Amendments. The 15th Amendment, as you may remember, says that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And as a little bit of an aside here, what most of you probably don't know, because you don't spend a lot of your time reading obscure legal texts, is that the subtitle of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, has a subtitle that says, "An Act to Enforce the 15th Amendment." 15th Amendment was passed a century earlier. And then we got the Act to enforce it in the 1960s, and that tells you something about the dynamics of democratization in the United States. And indeed, we know that the Reconstruction amendments were followed by a long Jim Crow period in which the rights that the amendments attempted to protect were denied to African Americans throughout the South. And that's also, I guess, the story is often told as, well, there's this Southern exception to the story of democratization in the United States. And look, the Southern exception is, I mean, something real, very dramatic that happened in the South that did not happen elsewhere. But we can't simply sort of isolate that in our understanding of our country's own history and what we've become. In the north of the United States, including in this state, after property restrictions on voting were eliminated, numerous other obstacles to democratic participation were erected. Arcane registration rules, for example, appear after they get rid of property requirements. Residency rules. The need to present citizenship papers. This was not an idea cooked up in the Trump administration. This was enforced in the late 19th century in a number of places. Or to give a very, a colorful example in a way, or the way in which voting and participation was made difficult. In New York State, which was a mixture of a progressive state, and not, you had to register to vote every year if you lived in cities of a certain size, but not in most of the state, but only in cities of a certain size, which applied to, to like 2 or 3, and mostly it was aimed at Brooklyn. And in response to activism of certain groups and to the left-leaning politics of certain groups, during one year, there were, in New York City and in Brooklyn, you had to register every year, but there were only 2 days on which you were permitted to register. And by coincidence, those turned out to be the Jewish holidays of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, when Jews were not supposed to be signing papers and doing such things. So this is a, we have a process of advances followed by contractions, and the contractions aren't accidental; they're purposive. They're by people who reject democratization. And I want to supplement this frame by adding in one more notion, and this, which leads to a few remarks I want to make about the current, our current situation and the current dilemma. I think one can think of 20th century history, and this is too broad and too schematic, but nonetheless, believe it. But you can think of the 20th century in the U.S. and elsewhere as a grand bargain between people who are pursuing democracy and social rights and equality and inclusiveness on the one hand, and basically between the forces of industrial capitalism on the other hand. The fact is that industrial capitalism and agricultural capitalism in the South wanted a much more hierarchical order. But the terms of the bargain, of what I've written about this a little bit, of this grand bargain, which happened piecemeal, didn't happen all at once, but you really want to think of it as a series of deals that were struck between capital and other folks. But the terms of the bargain was that capitalism, the free enterprise system, would be preserved. There was very strong socialist support in the United States in the early 20th century. Massachusetts, most of you probably don't know, the towns around Massachusetts, all the shoe manufacturing towns had socialist mayors, socialist city councils, and that was considered a threat. But the deal that was cut said, okay, we're going to keep a free enterprise system, but we're going to have a series of other institutions that will protect people's rights and protect people against the hazards and cruelty of capitalism. These included the regulation of business, antitrust policies, and regulation of other kinds of regulation against the harms they could do. For example, worker compensation. The United States was known as the land of dangers, but basically there was regulation. The creation of social insurance, particularly in the 1930s, the Social Security system, unemployment insurance, a minimum wage, eventually, very eventually, health care and health insurance. Another part of the deal was to protect the rights of organized labor, to protect unions and unionization. And it also included the expansion, and this comes a little bit later, to protect the system, it also included the expansion of voting rights. That you had to have full democracy in order to protect these other institutions and these other rights. And one can meaningfully talk about social and political progress in those terms, in terms of that bargain in the course of the 20th century. But what we are seeing now, and have been seeing for the last 20 or 30 years, is an attempt to unravel that bargain, an attempt to attack it, to criticize it, to reduce it. You may have noticed that regulation of business is weaker by the year. There's very little in for example, of antitrust regulation anymore. The American welfare state, which was never very strong, is being weakened in every respect, and it's being attacked by current conservative forces. The rights of labor to organize are being jeopardized and undercut in a variety of ways. And then, in order to try to preserve this attack, this criticism, this weakening of the state, the attack on voting rights themselves, which Theda has referred to, and which I think, I mean, I study voting rights for a living, but what is going on, that voting rights are very much under attack. And one of the very interesting things about the current moment is that this broad attack is very much national and not regionally focused. So, you know, well, it leads me in conclusion. Obviously, this is a moment that requires vigilance and resistance on many different fronts, including in universities and including in this one. And I don't, you know, there's those of us who have been around this institution for a number of years, and I left for about 25 years, but then I confess I came back. But it's an institution where many of us are proud to work here and study here. But we don't need to be either narcissistic or grandiose about the role of this university. There's plenty of narcissism and grandiosity in speaking about Harvard, but we ought not do that. But we should recognize that we are one small piece, and we are involved in one small piece of a much larger conflict. And what we do is important. Precisely, not because we're special, but precisely because we are and have joined in a national struggle. A final comment is a mixture. Everyone I've noticed before wants to end on a hopeful note. I'll try. But, you know, the starting point of this, and you may not think this is very hopeful, is that in the history of the world, the global history of the world, all democracies so far have failed. Okay. No, wait. Can we, I mean, Athens lasted almost 200 years, which was really quite extraordinary. Well, Theda, let me finish. Theda has a long history of criticizing anything I say, so, but in modern times, most democracies have lasted only for several decades. Okay, it's a very, very sobering thought, and I think, you know, my exhortation, if it's not optimistic, I mean, is that we do see also movements, and we see them in the last 20 or 30 years, and even before that, where people have organized and risen up and fought and protected their institutions, and they've done it very successfully. That can happen too. I mean, there's a long arc of failure, but there are many stories of people protecting or quickly restoring democratic institutions when they have been threatened. And I think we just want to make sure we here, in whatever we do, out in whatever communities we belong to, want to make sure that this democracy does not fail on our watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kesar. Democracy may be dying, but you know what lives forever? Rock. Yeah. Up next, I would love to welcome Mariel Baumgarten for a student performance. Mariel is a folk rock singer-songwriter originally from D.C., now a freshman in the Harvard New England Conservatory dual degree program. Her writing is preoccupied with narrative and atmosphere. She is currently working on a concept album series tentatively titled Butterfly Effect, and her debut album, Sunspit, released in May 2025. Thank you, Mariel.
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. And I'm going to do my little flamingo pose to tune with my phone. So I hope nobody minds. It does work. But yeah, so when I was first asked to play at this event, I was really overjoyed to sort of be able to help out with my music in whatever way I could, because opportunities to do that, to have my music interact with the issues that I care about, are kind of few and far between. But then I thought, you know, like, okay, I would love to do this event, but like, I'm not a particularly political singer. Like, am I really the right person to ask? Like, I'm just a folk singer. And then I thought, I'm not a political singer, I'm a folk singer. Because, as many of you probably know, like, the genre of folk has been kind of instrumental, no pun intended, in facilitating a lot of movements against the oppression of people for a lot of American history, most famously in the 1960s with artists like Bob Dylan, or before that with Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie. So I'm happy to follow in that tradition. And what I'm going to play for you today is, while it may not be topically extremely political, I think subtextually I wrote it with that in mind. It's a song called Cut, 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 which I wrote like 2 years ago. And it's a very wide-ranging song. It's a story song. Involves witchcraft, takes place in the 18th century. So it's like very far out. But the central theme of the song is scapegoating, which obviously is an extremely relevant issue today. Scapegoating of trans people, scapegoating of immigrants. It seems to be this administration's modus operandi. So I wanted to play this for you, just kind of as a reminder that all art is political. And I hope you enjoy. We're in tune. No, we're not. Sorry, that's not acceptable to me. 1 second.
In search of folk tales, fairy rings and snail trails. Joey looked so pale as he was spirited away. His eyes were shut, 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 shut. Shut, 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 shut. My mother said his mother was a pagan. Elixirs in the kitchen, that she double-crossed a demon who took her precious boy away. For what? The people loved me, the people loved him. We were the soft-cheeked, darling children, but I turned eerie and he turned alien, and us children frightened them. His mother saw she was baking, a little hair red-eyed and shaking. The people said it was sent by Satan, but oh, she knew her child's face deep in her gut. They set snares around the school grounds. The priest released the bloodhounds. He said he'd skin it if it came around. I knew that only I could keep it safe. You turned Joey back, I prayed at the closet altar I had made, and their unseen mouths devoured my offers. Their hearts of mice left stains upon the floor. Then I knew he was a boy again, and that I would never be the same. found him in the briar, his ankle caught in wire, how milky white his eyes were. I heard his mother wail, his throat was cut, 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 cut. She held him through the metal, her stare black as a kettle, but our hands red as devils. I pledge no veil, they once loved me, they once loved him. We were the soft-cheeked, darling children. Now I was eerie, his mother alien, we were foreign. How we frightened, exiled us past midnight, throwing salt and hunting knives. And my mother could meet my eyes, his mother packed our bags, and we were don't try to speak reason, your tongue will be oh, you harmless heathen, your tongue will be
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's give it up one more time for that amazing performance. Up next, now that we've spent a bit of time dwelling in the death of democracy, but also some hopeful moments, we now want to talk about why organizing matters and how we can get involved with organizing on campus. So, our first speaker in this category, let's welcome to the stage Professor Marshall Gans, the Rita E. Hauser Senior Lecturer in Leadership, Organizing, and Civil Society at the Kennedy School of Government. Professor Gans teaches, researches, and writes on leadership, narrative, strategy, and organization in social movements. He grew up in Bakersfield, California, and entered Harvard College in the fall of 1960. He left a year before graduating and spent 16 years with the United Farm Workers, gaining experience in union, political, and community organizing. During the 1980s, Professor Gans worked with grassroots groups to develop new organizing programs, and in 1991, he returned to Harvard College to complete his undergraduate degree. Gans is published in the American Journal of Sociology, American Political Science Review, American Prospect, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Stanford Social Innovation Review, and elsewhere. In 2007 to 2008, he was instrumental in the design of the grassroots organization for the 2008 Obama for President campaign. In association with the global leading change network of organizers, researchers, and educators, he coaches, trains, and advises social, civic, educational, healthcare, and political groups on organizing, training, and leadership development around the world.
Is there some water at hand? Good, thank you. So, good evening. Pretty anemic. Let's try again. Good evening. Good evening. Better. You know, the other thing is that I know a lot of references to solidarity, and as I'm looking at this space, it is the opposite thereof. I mean, people scattered all over the place. I'd just like to invite those who are way up in the stratosphere, come on down. These don't cost any more. You know, and let's kind of try to be with each other and not just like these little points in this very disparate space, because what we do is what we do. And so, yeah, thanks. Oh, we're making progress. It's great. A little more solidarity here. It's good. It's just more to have a conversation than to
watch a performance or a presentation, which is not really the idea. I want to talk with you. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity and to be with good friends and colleagues, Theda, Alex, Michael over there, Miles, anyway. But you may see a certain theme. When I was at the Mandani victory party, by myself, I raised the average age substantially. And I'm conscious of that. And I think the cross-generational conversations are so important. They're so important. And to the extent this is an opportunity for that, I really, really welcome that. The other thing is a question that I think we need to ask ourselves, which is, what are we building? What are we building? Let's think about that for a moment. I'm going to come back to that because it's a pretty important question. I think just to frame a bit, oh, thank you. Oh, it's water. That's great. Yeah. I want to frame a little bit what I'm to share. The first is to clearly recognize, as everyone has, the nature of what we might call a rock bottom moment when it comes to democracy in America, and that it seems to get more rock bottom every day. And the plus about rock bottom moments is they should be teaching us that we can't just keep doing what we were doing, because that's what got us here. In other words, it's a confrontation with the need to change, real change, not just trying to keep the thing afloat. It's that kind of a moment. And it's also a moment in which there is enormous uncertainty. We can't predict the future. We sometimes pretend we can. But we live in a very uncertain world, and in times like these, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, what's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen the next day? That is just the nature of life. That is not some kind of weird aberration. There's a German sociologist, philosopher named Hartmut Rosa, and he wrote a book called The Uncontrollability of the World, which is highly recommended reading, because he's arguing that when we try to assert control, it often turns into forms of oppression. And he offers as an alternative thinking about resonance and the experience of resonance with others, with our values and so forth. Just something to think about. But what I'm trying to underscore is the fact that under these conditions, Tom Hayden used to say change is slow except when it's fast. So under these conditions, to be an optimist or a pessimist is arrogant. It presumes, hey, everything's going to be okay, or it's all going to go to hell. There's an alternative to that. And I think the alternative to that, first of all, is to recognize the reality of unpredictability and uncertainty. And it's a word that often is abused and misused, but that word is hope. But let me explain what I mean by it. The 12th century philosopher Maimonides had a definition of hope that went belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. In other words, it is always probable Goliath will win, but sometimes David does. It was utterly improbable we'd elect a black man president of this country. It happened. Hope occupies the place between fantasy and certainty. It's that domain of could be, of possibility. And that's where the creativity is, it's where the strategic thinking is, the imagination is. And it underscores how critical it is for us to find our way to that place of being. And I'll just ask, how many people here have had an experience of hurt? You ever had an experience of hurt? You've been in the world? You're probably likely. Hurt. How about experience of hope? Anybody have? See, if you hadn't had the hurt, you wouldn't think the world needed fixing. And if you hadn't had the hope, you wouldn't be in this room. And sometimes we look out there for what's really in here. in our own lived experience. And in times like this, it's so important that we come together to share that so as to create the creative energy that's needed in a moment like this when really everything's in play. And trying to think of that as opportunity, not a problem, an opportunity. But it also puts responsibility on us. Now, the other thing I want to say a bit about is leadership and organizing. And, you know, we hear a lot about this structure, that structure, the other structure. The question is, where's the agency within us to interact with that, to engage with that, to become creative, to be strategists? And, you know, that's in many ways a really important question. And leadership is often conflated with domination and authority. But I want to suggest it's something quite different. The approach I've taken to leadership is rooted in 3 questions posed by the first century Jerusalem scholar, Rabbi Hillel. He was asked, how do I figure out what to do with my life? And he said, well, ask yourself 3 questions. The first is, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Not a selfish question, but it's a call to enough self-awareness that you can actually see others as other than a reflection on you, a recognition of your own worth, of your own value. You know, I was at MIT at a dinner with Tim Berners-Lee, the guy that invented the World Wide Web, and he was saying that machines can make decisions, but only humans can make choices. And his point was that, look, I love ChatGPT, I love Claude, best friend, so forth. But the point is that AI receives information in the forms of zeros and ones, and then it's a calculator. It does reckoning. It's like a super calculating. Now, as humans, we can calculate, but we learn through our emotions, we learn through our bodies, we learn through our experience, we learn through our presence to one another. We have such a richer source of information about the world and our place in it and how we interact with each other. And that's when he says choices. And what we should be doing is developing our capacity for judgment rather than trying to quantify everything into some abstract way of measuring. So that's why I'm focusing on agency and leadership as a way of exercising agency. But based on these 3 questions, because that first question about self matters. You know, sometimes people who are involved in organizing say, oh, I'm just a vessel. You're not a vessel, you're a human being. You've made choices to be doing what you're doing. And it matters, those choices. Why did you make those choices? What values moved you to make those choices? I'm not a vessel of anything. The second question, though, he says to ask yourself is, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what is to recognize that we exist in relationship with others. I mean, we are relational creatures. I mean, the way in which from birth to death, we are in relationship. And so my objectives are inextricably wrapped up in the capacity of others to realize theirs. And it's understanding that's a starting point, not this illusion of the radical individual who's floating somewhere in space that exists in economic models and not other places. You know what I'm talking about. So it's that second about understanding our relationality. And the third is, if not now, when? Now, that's not advice to jump in moving traffic. It's a caution against what Jane Addams called the snare of preparation. Let's planning, and we're going to plan, and we're going to keep planning until we come up with the perfect plan. And then we'll implement. And of course, the world will totally conform to our expectations, except that never happens. In other words, the idea of action, it's, we can't really learn to do well what we want to do until we actually begin to do it. In other words, that understanding flows from action, and with action, it's not prior to action. And I'm not talking about judgment and hypothesis and all of that, but I think we get pretty, you know, somebody interviewed Eisenhower right after D-Day invasion and said, General Eisenhower, boy, the plans must have been really important. He said, yeah, planning's important, but plans are useless. His point being that we can't predict the future. The best we can do is a hypothesis. And so we have to appreciate the fact that the creativity and the strategy really begins with the action. And so unless we build learning into action, we go off somewhere in space and miss the whole point of what we're trying to do. So it's trying to embed that. So for me, I think of leadership about the intersection of self with other with action, those sort of three elements. And the second thing is to recognize when leadership matters. I don't know, you've probably had projects of your own where people form a line outside your office or your desk and boy, everything's going great. And there's a whole line there saying, we just want to thank you for the great job that you're doing. Why the laughter? When does the line usually form? When? Yeah, there's problems. See, as long as the system's working, what do you need leadership for? It's working. See, it's the creative, adaptive, initiative-taking practice of leadership is precisely when there are dilemmas, contradictions, challenges, and all the rest. And so that can be kind of challenging to say, oh, this is what I'm buying into. And because you'll ask yourself, do I have the skills I need for these new challenges? Challenge to the hands. Can I use my resources in new ways? A strategic challenge, challenge to the head. And then where do I get the hope? Where do I get the courage? How do I inspire the hope and courage in others that it takes to take the risks that are often involved in dealing with real challenges, and that's a challenge to the heart. So it's a way of thinking of leadership in a heart, head, hands way. Now, unfortunately, in institutions like this one, head takes precedence. Hands come on somewhat, heart is absent, and it should be present. If there's anything we should be emphasizing these days, it's the humanities, but we're not doing that. We're doing just the opposite, because that's how we learn to cultivate our values, that which we care for, that which we will take risks for, that with which we can, how we can relate and experience others. So, given that, the definition that I've come to use is this, that leadership, it's about accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. So this is leadership as a practice, not as a structure, not as a position. A lot of people occupy positions of formal leadership. They're pretty awful leaders. I don't think we have to look too far for examples of that. On the other hand, those of us that have worked in communities, I mean, we meet people who are doing what I just described without the titles, without the designations, but that's what they're doing. And so it's an effort to open up our thinking about leadership as skills and practices to enabling people to work together successfully. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken in the work that I've been doing. And organizing, which has been up here, organizing, it's a particular form of leadership that begins by asking not what's my issue, but who are my people? Who are the people with whom I'm entering into this relationship and that we're working with one another? Who are my people? Now, these days, too often it's what's my issue? Well, I'm the bird people or the fish people. Well, we can't work together because it's birds or fish, right? And we're going to the same donor and we're competing. No, it's fish. It's crazy. We both have reverence for the natural world. That's what we ought to be getting together about. That's what we value. And issues can be profoundly divisive, scattering, and destructive, especially in the way our whole funding mechanism works these days. So the question of who are my people is a real question. And second with that, in other words, who am I engaging with? I think the word constituency can be helpful. It comes from the Latin constare, means to stand together, to bring people together, stand together, learn together, work together, and hopefully win together. Now, the second question then is change. There's a good book you might want to get called People, Power, Change. Yes. So the second term, though, is change. What does change mean? Affordability. What's that? It's an abstraction. See, I'm a big fan of Mamdani's. I think that campaign did some very important things that we need to understand that set it apart from our typical campaign that goes on. You know, it hasn't been mentioned, but I think the other institutional problem we have flowed from Buckley v. Vallejo, the Supreme Court decision that said that money is speech. Sid Verber used to say that liberal democracy is an experiment as to whether equal voice can balance unequal wealth. Well, once you make voice contingent on wealth, the whole thing breaks down. And what has happened as a result in this country is we've created this electoral industrial complex that's unlike any place in the world, that makes millions and millions every year by turning politics into marketing. In other words, politics, to the extent it's about people engaging with other people, that's not how the Harris campaign worked. People become data points and they become abstract. I went to the post-presidential election thing they have here with the leadership of the two campaigns. So I spent a day and a half in a room with the Trump people and the Harris people, and which was itself pretty interesting. But it was very clear the Harris campaign was trying to tell people what they ought to feel, not listening to what they felt. In other words, they're looking at people through this reductive data notion. Or New York Times sent a reporter, I just love to go door to door with a Harris organizer in Wisconsin. They come to the house, woman comes out, organizer says, I'm with the Harris campaign, you must be really concerned about choice. And she sort of says, well, maybe education, climate. He starts running down a list. How do I categorize this person? In other words, how do I dehumanize this person and turn them into a category or a label that then we can set the appropriate message in order to produce a stimulus response. Talk about transformation of the political means of production. And that's a big deal. And it is a lot to overcome because it also has affected the worlds of advocacy and organizing, this whole thing. This is not about digital. It is about transforming people engaging with people into data points engaging with data points and what that does to our politics and what it does to people. What I was going to say about Mamdani, they actually paid attention to people. Their campaign was conversations, and you know, it wasn't using TikTok. It was the content of what they were doing, and what they were doing, they based their whole campaign on conversations, on listening, not just, you know, you don't go out and say, vote for money. It's like engaging in what's hurting people. Where's their hope? Where's the pain points, the hurt points? You don't do that through some abstraction. You do it by engaging with people directly. And so they came up with a campaign. Everybody knows what the platform was, right? You know Mamdani's platform? Anybody know? What? Come on, take a chance. Huh? It wasn't affordability. It's more specific than that. What was it? Okay, childcare, number one. What else? Number two. Free buses, number three. Rent control, number four. You bet. See, look, that's the campaign. Oh, it's a complicated message for a very complex policy program, blah, blah, blah. No, this was real. And it comes from really paying attention to where people are and what they care for and what their lived experience is and where the hope can be. You know, one of the most difficult things these days, people do not feel seen or heard. And not being seen or heard is a real problem. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. That campaign did a hell of a good job of that. And it's not perfect by any means, but the starting point was very, very different than a typical electoral campaign where you had a core set of people who shared values. And we're building a campaign rooted in those values, which then went to the different methods that they used. And what you're going to see right now is people say, oh, the Mamdani campaign, they did this, they did that. They're missing the point. It's the people who were shaping the campaign. It's the people who became the campaign. The tendency is to want to substitute function for people. and sort of, oh, we'll just do this. Well, of course it's not going to work because it's fake. And so there's a lot to learn from that. But this is just my point about people and about paying attention to what change actually means in people's lives. Affordability is a great example. Affordability, wonderful. Now we're going to do a whole lot of stuff about affordability. What the hell is that? I know what a free bus is, you know. I know what childcare is. And it's not about talking down. It's about paying attention to what's real in people's lives. The third term of organizing, people, change, is power. And that also is one of those words that people seem to avoid using. And why that is so, is a lot of reasons. But I've sort of come to a way of thinking about it. If you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? You need what I've got more than I need what you've got. Who's got the power? Me or you? I can't hear. All right, and if it's reversed, then who's got the power? Yeah. See, power is not something you have. It is an influence generated by interdependence. In other words, we live in an interdependent world. The question is, what are the terms of interdependence? What are the terms of interdependence? Now, if they're more or less balanced, we create a credit union, a co-op. We're creating a lot of influence through our collaboration. But when they're out of whack, and most of the resources are here and the needs are here, it'll turn into domination almost inevitably. And so then the question is, how do you balance that? And one way you don't balance it is to do what they're doing. That's, that's like David being confused and thinking he could fight Goliath by being Goliath. It doesn't work that way. And so it is about understanding. I teach very much from the Montgomery bus boycott example because everybody knows about Rosa Parks, segregated buses, and so forth. They boycotted buses for a year, and they won. And now the question is, where in the world did they get their power? I mean, this was in Montgomery, Alabama, 1955. These were black people, day workers. Where did they get their power? What do you think? What resources did they have? Okay, I see a symbol for money. Even more basic, even more fundamental. What do you see when you look down? What do you see? Feet. Everybody had feet. Use your feet to walk to work and deny the bus company a bus fare instead of using your feet to get on the bus and give the bus company the bus fare. Individual dependency is transformed into the company's dependency on an organized community. So as we think about organizing and organizing strategies, we don't start with what we don't have, we start with what we do have. And, and that's not about rich people. I mean, the movements I was involved in were not about rich people. The movements I was involved in required sacrifice, they required courage, and that's what really impressed me about the civil rights movement, was the courage. And my introduction to organizing was understanding that it was about people finding the courage with each other to make claims, to use their voice, and to stand up to the power that was dominating them. So that was kind of a semester class in a few minutes. No, but my point is that being clear about what we're talking about when what we're talking about really, really matters. Because, and we teach organizing not as models. I don't believe in models. A model is a snapshot of a dynamic process in a moment. And then we say, oh, this is the model, and we fit everybody into it. It's not it. It's practices. It's ways of doing things and sustained learning. And in organizing, it's particularly about building relationships, number one. How many, you ever been at a thing where you say, ooh, I just got networked? Yeah. Was that relational? No, someone was trying to extract resources from you. So many of our interactions these days are transactions. They're not relationships. And paying seriously what's the difference between a relationship and a transaction is that we risk committing to another person or entity for an uncertain future. And from that risk, trust may grow. So the other are storytelling, strategizing, action and structuring. You can come to our course for that. The last thing I want to say, I've got the signals here, I'm getting it, time to stop, is a new class that Chris Robichaud teaches at the Kennedy School, and he's a philosopher who's also a gamer. We started a J-term class, and we called it Being Human. We had 20 students for a co-curricular. Last year we had 40 students. This year we had 90 students. There is a hunger to get real about the value of being a human being in ourselves and in others. And it goes to the core of our moral understanding, our understanding of ourselves, of others, and sort of where we need to go in order to build power with others to address these challenges that we face. So, be human. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Gans. I'm now excited to turn it over to a discussion on organizing at Harvard through the generations. We, in fact, have a lot of generations present in the room here tonight, which I personally didn't know because all of you have such a youthful glow. But I'm happy to introduce our two conversationalists, Michael Ansara and Daniel Noger. Michael Ansara is a longtime organizer, poet, and memoirist. He was a leader of the Students for a Democratic Society at Harvard in the 1960s. He spent 10 years organizing opposition to the war in Vietnam. He has been a community organizer, worked on voter registration and political campaigns, and trained many organizers. His memoir, The Hard Work of Hope, was published last July by Cornell University Press. Daniel Noger from Pembroke, Massachusetts, is a current freshman at Harvard College, where he intends to study government as well as engage in student activism and music. Outside of school, Danny greatly enjoys singing and playing the piano.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm really glad to be here, and you know, I'm so delighted to be with Students for Freedom. I feel this long flow of Harvard students who've organized and protested and been activists. And at Harvard, it's not really treasured enough. I went back and found that in 1766, there was a massive protest of Harvard students about butter. It was called the butter protest because the butter was rancid and the food was terrible. And it was led by the grandfather of Thoreau. And the Harvard president at the time set the precedent for Harvard presidents by severing half of the student body. And then there was organizing, and finally they were reinstated. But there's this glorious history, and I'm so pleased to join Students for Freedom.
Thank you. So jumping right into your life and your career, you were first involved in the civil rights movement very early in life. At about age 13, is that correct?
Yes, it's true.
What was that moment like, and did you understand at the time what you were stepping into?
No, I definitely didn't. It was really one of those moments that changes your whole life. I was walking by a picket line outside of a Woolworths. I was 13 years old. I was miserable. I was depressed. I was suffering adolescent angst. And I stopped, and I started talking with the people in the picket line. And they were telling me that they were picketing Woolworths because it wouldn't serve a cup of coffee to the students from Greensboro, North Carolina. And something just pulled me into that line, and it completely changed my life. I found enormous hope, and I found that I could be part of something that was much larger than myself, which gave me profound meaning. And I fell in love with the organizing and was adopted by a brilliant group of young organizers in Boston. And so not only did I have the organizers of SNCC to learn from and emulate, but the organizers in Boston taught me how to organize and go door to door. And I saw that when people come together, people change. And when people change, they also build political power and can change the world.
So you chaired the 1969 Harvard Strike Committee, and years later we've seen students protest on the same campus on several different topics, such as the conflict in the Middle East and right now during the grad student strike. What do you make of how institutions like Harvard respond to student dissent now versus back then?
Well, so I think it's important to recognize differences. I think students today are in a very different situation than I was and my peers. There is so much more insecurity and so much more fear. I mean, yes, we lived in a very dangerous time, but to be honest with you, we didn't worry about whether the value of our degree would be completely outweighed by the crushing student debt that students would have. We didn't think a lot about whether we would make enough money. We worried about whether we would have moral careers. We didn't worry about people being grabbed off the street and not just expelled, but deported. So I think there's a tremendous pressure that students are under today, and I think it's really important that that be recognized. In terms of administrations, I'm struck by how foolish college presidents and administrations are. I mean, just to give you the stunning example of that, in 1969, we occupied University Hall. The campus had turned against the war completely, but it had not adopted SDS and the occupation of University Hall. If President Pusey had let us sit in that hall and stew, it would have petered out. But he called in state troopers and Cambridge police who not only arrested and beat us, but then beat all sorts of people coming out of the dorms in Harvard Yard. And that produced a sudden crystallization that not only is the war wrong, but the Harvard administration can't be trusted, and the university had to go on strike, and 16,000 members of the university community went on strike. And so I would say to students today, I really am very humble about suggesting what you should do, but I always believe that when we organize, we can create new possibilities. And the important thing is to reach out and constantly be talking to your fellow students and build the power of students throughout the university.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've got just one brief last question for you. So the title of The Hard Work of Hope by you communicates that hope is something that you feel, but also something that needs effort to keep up. Where do you get your hope from today in 2026?
Well, so first let me talk just 2 seconds. I got 1 minute on hope itself, because I want to echo what's been said. You know, hope is not based on certainty. Hope is not a prediction. Hope is a choice. And it's a choice that we make for one reason, and that is that the future is not predetermined. What is going to happen in November is not predetermined either way. What's going to happen after November is not predetermined. And because it's not predetermined, yes, there are big forces at work: political, technological, social, cultural, economic. But one of the big forces at work is the decisions that millions and millions of us will make about what we do. In other words, because the future is not predetermined, we have agency. And when we come together and combine together, we can actually shape that future. And that's what gives me hope. And it's a real hope, particularly in the young people of our country. I really believe that young people, with all the fear and pressure that they're feeling, they will fight for their future. And when they fight for their future, they're fighting for the future of our country and for democracy.
Thank you very much for coming today. Please, a round for applause for Michael Anzara.
Thank you so much, both of you. I am now honored to welcome to the podium Professor Archon Fung. His scholarship and teaching focus on understanding policies and practices that can deepen democracy, especially through participation, deliberation, and transparency. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. Thank you very much. I feel like it's maybe time for the 7th inning stretch or something like that. Thanks a lot. So I'll be brief in my remarks. One of the things I do is ethics and political philosophy. So I'm going to offer some remarks on the democratic ethics of a commitment to democracy. And when I talk about the 3 commitments, It's going to sound like fairly straightforward to you, but I'm going to try to tease out a way in which the commitments, each of them, is harder at a moral level than it might seem. The first commitment is a commitment to free spaces. And this is probably the most fundamental kind of thing in a democracy, is that there need to be free spaces in society. And to, a little bit to Theta's point and then Alex's point, I agree we shouldn't be too centrally focused on Harvard, but I can't think of any movement against authoritarianism or for social justice in the modern era in which students on campuses have not been a central part. And that's the civil rights movement, that's the Chinese students in Tiananmen Square, that's every anti-authoritarian movement in Latin America, that's, of course, the civil rights movement, and many others. And so, you act for justice and against authoritarianism where we are, and we're right here. And we're on a university campus, and part of our role is to create that free space, because free spaces are very powerful. As we saw in Minneapolis lately, as Theta brought up, it was people in free spaces versus ICE. And the winner was the people in the free spaces. This is a year in America and around the world in which America has suffered the steepest democratic backsliding, according to VDEM and others, that has been measured on history and in American history. And so why is the state of protest at Harvard like this year? It's because after October 7th, the state of protest at Harvard looked like this. And the response to that state of protest was to close off free spaces at Harvard through campus use rules, through disciplining protests, etc. And so I think that part of the democratic commitment of Harvard leadership and of all of us as members and affiliates of Harvard University needs to be expanding the free space, recapturing the free space that a university ought to be. That's the first democratic commitment. And I do want to say that you think, okay, well, that's an easy one. Everyone wants free spaces. But I think even that one is not so easy. I, as a professor, and I'd be curious about people as students here, I feel like there's a chilling effect coming from many directions at Harvard. And the first direction is kind of a left woke direction that has been, people have complained about a lot for about a decade and a half. And I think that is still there, and it was real. And we're right to kind of claim free space against that chilling effect. But on top of that chilling effect is another crosswind, which is a university that sent out messages that DEI and talk about Gaza is just unwelcome. And I think people are smart enough around here to have received that message. And so that is a chilling effect. And there's a third chilling effect that is from the Trump administration itself. And I think that students from the military and international students feel the brunt of that chilling effect the most. So, like I say, everybody loves free speech until somebody says something they don't like. And I think that that's the problem with the commitment to free spaces. The second is a commitment to democracy itself. And my friend Jay Gorse-Eichart, who's a faculty member in the government department, says that there's no democracy without Democrats. And a commitment to democracy, of course, but what it means is to have a commitment to democracy is you have to give up other valuable things in your life. And that's true at the individual citizen level, and it's true at the leadership level. And we've seen a number of leaders across big tech, that's like the inauguration with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Mark and others, in law firms, in media organizations, in universities that have caves. So whereas I would have thought a year and a half ago that civil society in America was strong at the top and strong at the bottom, it turns out that what I wanted was Lion Kings at the top of these organizations. But what we got was the lion who had no courage from The Wizard of Oz. That might be a little dated for that. Alex, my son, said this might be a little dated reference. What's curious, and I think sociologists will be thinking about this for a while, is it feels like your intuition is that the commitment to democracy should be pretty high among those in leadership positions who can afford it and who have lots of resources, and then relatively low where people don't have much income, they don't have much resources, they're not famous, they don't have much power. But I feel like what we've seen in the last year is the commitment to democracy is inverted. You see a couple people in Minneapolis get shot and killed, and then a bunch of neighbors right behind them saying, hey, me next, here I am. Whereas, with the leadership level, like what exactly is there to lose? And yet you see little commitment to democracy. And I think, I've been trying to puzzle this through, and I think the explanation for that might be like at a couple of levels. One, some leaders just might not believe what a bunch of people in this room believe, which is that democracy is on the precipice. They might just think, oh, we're in kind of a George Bush to Barack Obama normal, and this is just a little bit of a click to the right. That's certainly what people were saying right after Trump's second-term election. Oh, the vibe has changed. That's why we got to get more conservative voices all around. And then some of the others of us were saying, well, yeah, maybe the vibe has changed, but really I think it's authoritarianism that's around the corner. Once again, I think I'm right. They're wrong. Okay. And the other reason is I think that people in leadership positions feel like they have a great moral commitment to protect the equities of the organizations that they lead. And that is certainly true as a leader of an organization. But the point of saying that everybody should have a commitment to democracy is to say, yeah, there is this other equity also, and that is your commitment to the democratic republic. And I think that that's the thing that lately has been zeroed out, because it's been a long, long time since in America, corporate leaders or media leaders or law firm leaders or university leaders have had to do anything for democracy. And now when they do, that muscle is quite atrophied. And even the thought that they might have to do something for democracy seems kind of hard to compute, I think. Okay, so the third commitment is a commitment to building an anti-authoritarian coalition. And this one might be a little bit harder than one or two for you. This is a super simplistic way of thinking about the fight that we're in right now. There's the right and there's the left. And a part of that right is an authoritarian right, but not all of it. Maybe it's 40% of the right, maybe it's 60% of the right, depends on how you count, depends on what you're talking about. But as long as the fight is this, like, yeah, the Democrats might win in the midterms, but this is going to be a pendulum swing back and forth. It's going to be a toss of the coin about whether it tips Democratic or authoritarian. So we've got to have a different fight. And this is to Theta's point and Alex's point about getting off campus, and Michael's point that he makes all the time about the need to talk to other people outside of campus, is can there be an anti-authoritarian coalition that looks more like the green line? And if you can create politics along that green line, then democracy is a lot more secure than if it's a 50-50 or 45-55 kind of fight. But in order to do that, people are going to have to give up some stuff. They're going to have some uncomfortable conversations. One of those conversations that's going to be uncomfortable is the class conversation. My friends and colleagues, Taegu Lee and Pepper Culpepper have written an article on good populism, and they argue that a bunch of people on this right base corner are in it because of economic injustice and grievance. And so they're in it basically because they think there's an Epstein class, which is both the right elites and the left elites, by the way, right? And so that is a basis for solidarity. Another uncomfortable conversation is that a lot of people on the right base think that people like us are know-it-all scientists, policy experts, who don't know anything about their lives, telling them what to do. And that's another uncomfortable conversation, because I actually think there's something to that. So if you look at people who have a great deal of trust in science, people on that red side of the spectrum now are at about 30%. People on that left side, the blue two left blocks, are up at 60 or 70%. I think 60 or 70% is way too high, right? I think we need to have those difficult conversations. And I've got about 33 seconds left. So I do think that on all three commitments, what I take great hope in is the inversion. You would think that it's like people who are tenured professors or presidents of of universities or media organizations or law firms that have shown the greatest commitment to free spaces, to democracy, to anti-authoritarianism, But that just hasn't been my experience over the last year. It's been young people. And it's been young people in the streets. It's been young people on university campuses. And so that's where I'm learning from. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Fung. The next slide we have was something that I designed when I had foolish but beautiful dreams of being ahead of schedule at this point. So they are also slides that I think are going to be somewhat frightening to skip past out of context, so we're just going to do a really atrocious speed run, okay? This is a little game show that I like to call Real or Onion. Are any of you familiar with the satirical newspaper, The Onion? Yeah, so sometimes satire maybe is a little too close to real life. So I'm going to really quick show an example of something that a politician maybe said or tweeted. And when I say Real or Onion, I need you guys to like shout out right away, because we're speed running, what you think it was, okay? Okay. First one, J.D. Vance claims that universal daycare is class war against normal people. Real or Onion? Real! Mitt Romney claimed he was better than Kristi Noem because, as he put it, I didn't eat my dog. Real or Onion? That's real. Kristi Noem wrote about killing a dog in a memoir she chose to release, and he really wanted to get in on that discourse. RFK Jr. defends Trump's erroneous claim about reductions in prescription prices by saying Trump just has a different way of calculating percentages. Real? Trump condemned circuses on social media, or Truth Social, saying that they aren't violent enough. That is The Onion. But he does still weigh in on the entertainment industry. You can see this plethora of tweets about how Robert Pattinson deserves better than Kristen Stewart. Okay, RFK Jr. cautioned that some contemporary health issues can be attributed to Americans' lack of bee consumption. Real or Onion? It is Onion. But don't worry, he still has plenty of weird health claims. On a podcast, RFK Jr. did claim that toxic chemicals are responsible for children identifying as trans. And he also went on another podcast, which he should stop being invited to, that he's not scared of germs because he used to snort cocaine off of toilet seats. Thank you, Robert. Iowa Senator Joni Ernst reassured a constituent who is concerned over Medicaid cuts, saying that we are all going to die. Real! So, with all this in mind about the very interesting state our leadership is in, I am super happy to turn it over to some leadership that I actually believe in. Let's give it up for Patty Nolan, co-chair of Crimson Courage, and Cambridge City Council member. Thank you.
Okay. That was pretty fun. All right, so I'm supposed to do the what to do action, right? This is the action part of the program. So I'm with Crimson Courage. What? Real. If any of you live in Cambridge, I work for you. I love working for you. And I will say I got my start in activism right here on the Harvard campus with the South Africa Solidarity Committee, which was started by a friend of mine who sent a quote, which we'll send around, I think, to everybody, who sent a message to say, they were rebuffed. She was from South Africa. She was an international student. They tried a bunch of stuff. The administration rebuffed them, and they just kept trying. And then there was a candlelight march through Harvard Yard and through the Harvard Square, which had 3,500 students at it, which was a phenomenal turning point in at least student activism. And she ended her remarks by saying, whatever passion you have, please students, keep getting engaged because you can make a difference. They made some little difference in the Harvard Corporation. I will say Crimson Courage, we will take at least a little credit for Harvard continuing to stand up. It really did make a difference that thousands and thousands of alums, even those of us who don't make millions of dollars and give millions of dollars to the university, there were thousands of us who stood up and said, Harvard, we will have your back. If you continue to stand up, we'll stand with you as long as you keep standing up. So what can you do now? One thing is join our list if you're not on it already. Any seniors here or faculty members? Okay, so that means you're going to have a ticket to get into the yard on commencement, and we would love for you to work with us to distribute some of the Crimson Courage information that we have. So come see any of us afterwards. And any of you online, same goes for you too. Follow the lead of those who are speaking up and standing up is what you can do. There's Stand for Campus Freedom, which Crimson Courage is part of, has an ICE off-campus sign-on letter that's going around. It's really important for that to be signed on by everybody across the country. May 1st, there's an action nationwide about standing up to say we really have to stand up for all of the values that we hold in terms of pushing back on what is happening nationwide. So wherever you are, whether you're online, if you're listening from afar, make sure you get in touch with the folks organizing that. And to speak up about the threats and the dangers. It's really critically important to speak up. Everything you've heard here today, we've already talked about the dangers coming. And also for Harvard and for higher ed, for all the flaws of our institution, I'm an alum, and for all of the ways in which all of us, I think, could think of ways it could be improved. It has done phenomenally positive work in the world, and that is not known. And there's a serious issue around the country of all of Harvard is just elite. They don't do anything for us. Higher education is just something we don't have to pay attention to. It's really important to share your story about what you know about the positive that has been happening on through the range of research that Harvard and other institutions of higher education have done. It matters to our economy, to our innovation, to our literally our public health and our democracy. So telling your story to folks you know is critically important, I think, in this. And it's something you can actually do and control. The other thing we would say, we're also in alliance with alumni groups, grassroots alumni groups are forming across the country. All of us in this room, do any of you know anyone at another institution, or you are an alum at another institution? Or you live in a city where there's another institution? Really? Use those contacts. Let those people know how important it is to stand in this fight for democracy, for higher education, for academic freedom, for all the things we've been learning about here today. Spread the word and use your connections where it most matters. I'll say one more thing, which is there's a coming fight that really may be challenging and may completely change everything we know about higher education and financial aid, which is a fight around accreditation. The administration is trying to suggest that the accreditation entities that are out there be changed to ones that they control, that they define. They will say, in order to be accredited, you just have to go to this. What's not to like about it? We're just talking about greater accountability. We want to make sure that institutions have good outcomes for their students and treat people fairly. That's what they're saying, and what they're really doing is it's a federal takeover of the accreditation system so that there will be no chance at all for institutions to define, as we just heard from Theda and others, who they hire, who they admit, and what they teach. It's serious. These people who are doing it, we know they're pretty effective, they're dastardly, and they are pushing this in a way because their compact did not work. So look for that. That may well be our ask for Crimson Courage at Alumni Day and reunions. The key is that, again, it seems okay what they say, and at the heart of it, it would be federally defined standards which would weaponize accreditation. No college that is not accredited can give financial aid. So this will be game over across the country if we let this happen. So it's critically important. Keep your eyes on that, because their goal is control. I also think it's supreme irony that viewpoint diversity, which we've heard about, which I think we would agree, as Arkan said, we could use more. Let's make sure it's additive and that we contribute more. We don't take away from what's on this campus, but we add to it if there are some voices that are missing. So viewpoint diversity, okay. Diversity, not okay. Affirmative action, really not good. But preferences and affirmative action for conservatives, really good. It's really interesting how this supremely ironic way that we are in this world where upside down is right side up, where all those ways that 1984 at the end of it had some things where, right is wrong and up is down and pigs are people and people are pigs. It was just bizarre. We're living in this world right now. It's critically important. Stay tuned, stay engaged, and use your connections in every single place across the country. Anyone online, you really need to do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nolan. Up next, we will hear from HUA President-elect Zach Berg, a sophomore looking to go into academia who has worked on pro-democracy work, campaigns, and education policy research. Let's hear it for Zach.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone who is here online, and a special thanks to everyone who is spending their Friday nights with us on a program that I understand is not always exactly on time. A huge thank you to Students for Freedom, and a even bigger thank you to Crimson Courage. I actually want to talk today a little bit about courage, because the last year has been a year that has required an immense amount of courage. It's a required courage to say that the status quo is not okay. It's not okay for friends of mine to not be able to walk through the yard for fears that if they do so, they will be deported from campus. It's not okay for people to look at the school that they once dreamed of as a city on a hill, as a representation of everything that is good in academia, and say that that institution no longer has autonomy, that that institution no longer stands for them, that the administration cares more about treating them as numbers on a spreadsheet than they do about each individual student. I was never involved in the HUA before a week ago, when I realized that what was happening on our campus was not enough. It was not enough to say that Harvard is only one school. It is not enough to say that Harvard can bow. That Harvard ultimately is a symbol of academia more broadly. And what we do right now and how we approach the current moment of academia will change the future not only for students at Harvard, but also students around the world, undergraduates, both in the United States and abroad. And I think, therefore, it's very important for us to think about how we can continue to act with courage, how we can continue to have hope for the future. Because yes, it's been a year of hurt. It's been a year where our autonomy is under threat, that an institution that has been around for almost 400 years as an institution with its own agency, with its own autonomy, no longer has that clear runway that it always has. And yet, I'm here optimistic. I'm optimistic for those of you who have sat through these many hours of speeches and heard Sial, that it was actually a Crimson Courage donor that was the first ever donor to the Harvard Undergraduate Association's Independent Fund. Yes. I'm optimistic because of the alumni that we've talked to, the hundreds of people who are a part of student organizations on campus. They've said that they're willing to fight, that they're willing to create a Harvard that does actually focus on students, that doesn't treat us merely as pawns in the administration's game of chess, but as individual people that want to make Harvard a transformative experience, that believe in the mission of the university, that we don't only believe in what we learn in classes, but that we come to this institution to learn from people who are different from us, to engage with people with different ideas. It's why I'm also running with someone whom I have disagreed with, and I'm so excited to lead with Daniel, who is not here today, but we have disagreed. And I think that's what's beautiful about Harvard, is that I'm able to disagree with someone, to become close friends with them, to ultimately run the undergraduate student body with them, and to work together to make sure that Harvard can become a place that works for all of us. We're incredibly excited this year for a couple of things, but most notably, as Sial mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that the institution always prioritizes students, that the administration does not bow down to the larger American administration, that it does not prioritize where we are on a ranking sheet, does not prioritize what we look like on a spreadsheet, does not prioritize how the media covers us, because we are people, and it's some of the brightest minds that have come to this campus. I've learned as much from the people here as from all of the wonderful professors. So it's time to fight for that. It's time to fight for students. It's time to fight for our experience. It's time to fight for our autonomy. We're very excited to expand on all of the amazing work that Sial and Caleb did this year, to raise money, to actually have an endowment so we are separate from the university, so we can speak up, so we can have autonomy, so it can be a place of free speech for all students without having any fear that their club's funding will be cut, because ultimately right now we rely on the Harvard administration. We rely on them for our funding, which means that student organizations rely on them as well. Our mission is not about money in a bank account. It's not about making sure that we can say that we have as much money as possible. It's not about bragging that we're the richest organization on campus. It's about students. And money is the way that we get there, but it's not the end goal. Our end goal will always be making sure that students themselves have autonomy, that students themselves feel like it can truly be the transformative experience at Harvard that they were promised, and that students can have the best experience that they can possibly be. So I'm very excited for all of the work that we're going to do ahead. I'm very lucky to be working with some wonderful people. Our two amazing incoming co-treasurers are here in the front. They're going to do some excellent work. Yes, round of applause for them. I'm really excited for all of the work we're going to do, and I'm really excited to make sure that we can always make Harvard a place that prioritizes the student experience. Thank you guys all so much.
Thank you, Zach. And up next, we have Adam Sikla, a member of the Harvard Academic Workers, to speak a bit about what the HAW is fighting for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for Students for Freedom for inviting me to speak on behalf of the Harvard Academic Workers. HAW represents 2,800 teachers and researchers that you interact with every day. And if you're not a student, at least the researchers do the research that provides the health and technological advancements that you interact with every day. We formed about 2 years ago, before the Trump administration. And even then, we always knew that we had a tough fight for our basic rights as workers here. As a union, we knew that we had an uphill battle for fair representation and fair protections. And since the attacks on Harvard and higher ed, we've had a steeper hill ahead of us. When the attacks first started on Harvard, HAW mobilized to help organize rallies. We participated in a lawsuit in order to get the funding back that was taken away from Harvard, 11 days before Harvard itself did. And HAW, along with many of the organizations here today, demanded that Harvard stand up. And it did, eventually. But immediately upon doing so, Harvard put the cost of that standing up on workers, and frankly, on the students and on its own mission. Between January 2025 and the incoming academic year, you will have lost 20% of your non-tenure track teachers. What will happen to your class sizes? What will happen to the inventive classes that cover the niche topics that make Harvard a unique educational environment? Since January 2025, the Harvard Corporation has eliminated or pushed out 20% of the researchers in our unit. So I ask all of you, what happens to that life-saving research they were pursuing? And I want to be clear, the cuts were not necessary. Harvard is sitting on a $57 billion endowment. If it's not for this rainy day, I'm not sure what rainy day it's for. And even besides that, it didn't even lose the money that the Trump administration threatened to take away. That money is all still here. These cuts happened purely by choice. It was a choice by the Harvard Corporation to take away education and science from all of you. HAW is right now negotiating its first contract, and throughout these negotiations, the corporation has been trying its best to set new standards, but unfortunately not new, better standards. It's been racing to the bottom to redefine what are the worst ways it can treat its workers, what are the worst ways it can get away with. We've always had an uphill battle, and the corporation right now is taking advantage of the Trump administration to make that uphill battle steeper. And we know this from our comrades in Harvard Graduate Student Union who are outside striking right now. They've had very similar fights. But there's one thing I learned fighting for protections against both the federal government and my employer at the same time. It's that together we can win. We can't just sit and wait for others to win for us, but if we speak to each other, if we organize, we communicate with one another and build a community, we can win. I actually really love being here today with all of you because it's really inspiring to see how each person is fighting in their own individual way. I'm glad to meet all of you. I'm glad to continue to build a community and to build coalitions that we can work together going forward. Talk to myself or Julian in the back after this so that we can build our own communities here. I know we're all fighting for a better world in our own ways, and together we can build that even better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. We will now hear from the Harvard Graduate Students Union.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Latne. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in the Speech and Language Hearing Department. We study cognitive neuroscience, and I am here today as part of the Harvard Graduate Students Union. As most of you hopefully know by now, we're on strike. And what does that mean for us in this very context? Well, for one, it means we're stretched very thin. And so we have very few, or we don't have a lot of resources. So you've got me, a very tired me, instead of an energized executive board member to come speak to you today. But I thought it was important because I feel like HGSU represents kind of an opportunity, a case in point for all of the things that have been spoken about today. So this is the moment that we're kind of like ready to capitalize on. So I'll just give, it's going to take, this is a little bit of a different tone from some of the other talks, but I just want to give you a high-level overview of the union, and then I'll go into our campaign and what we're fighting for and how it kind of intersects with all of the talks today. The Harvard Graduate Student Union is a local union of the UAW, represents all students employed by the university to provide instructional services and research services. So there's a bit of a misnomer. It's not just graduate students. It's also undergrad CAs, TFs, and TAs as well. We have about 5,000 students that are in unit, and about 3,000 of these have opted to be members of the union. Right now we are an open shop, which means that you have to opt in, but we're hoping to move to an agency shop in which everyone will pay their fair share fees in hopes of growing our base. We have a number of working groups that work across a bunch of different areas. I'm part of the International Students Working Group. We have a Racial Justice Working Group, Solidarity Committee, and the list goes on and on. Anything that I'm talking about today is on hgsu.org if you want to know more. And then I'm going to go ahead and plug hgsu.org/strike if you want to know anything about the, yes. Harvard Grad Union, we have an alias, HGSU, so it's even shorter. But harvardgradunion.org is everything it has everything that you would need to know. Okay, I'm going to talk about our current contract campaign and our current strike. So in April 2025, we began negotiating with the university for a new contract. That contract expired, our old contract expired in July 2025. On July 2nd, 2025, the corporation unilaterally and illegally, in the eyes of the UAW, removed approximately 800 workers from the union, claiming that they had been erroneously included for 5 years. So those negotiations that we had started with the corporation took a new level of antagonism as the university brought out this hostility and kind of absurd in our eyes claim that these workers were never part of the union in the first place. Our contract campaign has been, I'm going to highlight 3 things today around protections for non-citizen workers, protections against sexual harassment and discrimination, and then the third category, pay and compensation. I think if I could just give one example of how tedious these negotiations and hostile, in my opinion, the negotiations have been, I'll highlight the article that the union proposed on protections for international students. We proposed Article 13, which had a Section 10 which we called Ensuring a Safe Campus, and this detailed a list of expectations that we have for the university in protecting its non-citizens. The corporation waited 9 months to return anything to us on this article, and this was obviously in the midst of state violence against international students, and we found this to be unacceptable. When they did return an article, they offered no language around ensuring a safe campus. Is it really too much to ask for a safe campus here? We're also asking for pay on par with MIT living wage calculator. So I've got 10 seconds left, so I'm going to run through this as quickly as possible. We voted to go on strike and set a deadline of this past Monday. 96% of people voted in favor of strike, and so we were hoping that this would spur on negotiations with the university, but those failed. And so as of Monday, we're on strike. Every day we're turning out hundreds of picketers across the Longwood and Cambridge campus, logging cumulatively thousands of hours. We have just completed strike day 4, and we will be on strike until the corporation treats its graduate students as equals at the bargaining table and ensures a safe, just campus that offers a living wage for all students. So the call to action, hgsu.org, harvardgradunion.org. Please go there for more information. There have been many calls across both today and kind of from students across the past year to asking that the university protect its non-citizens or international student workers. The university has opted for silence for the last year or so, and I think this is the moment where we can pressure and urge the university to take more explicit action and offer tangible protections for its international students. So what I would ask of you, I just have 3 things. Faculty are well positioned to urge the administration to speed up negotiations. We have a faculty email that can be sent. We have a template that you could send. Anyone can donate to the strike hardship fund. We have that online at hgsu.org/strike. And then the last thing is that I think there is a broad recognition on campus right now that this is the moment where a large coalition can form to ensure protections for non-citizens. And so up next, if I read the schedule correctly, we have the Monarch Coalition, which the International Student Working Group, which I'm a part of, has partnered with. And so you'll hear from them next. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are now going to hear from, I believe, the Harvard Undergraduate Urban Sustainability Lab. Is Clive here? Amazing. Clive is a junior studying government, and he's the co-president of the Urban Sustainability Lab. And he is here to tell you about the work that they're doing.
Thank you. Thanks to Harvard Students for Freedom for having me here today to speak about the Harvard Undergraduate Urban Sustainability Lab. We are the student-led hub for urban studies at Harvard College. So I have some quick questions. How many of us complain about potholes like regularly, or how difficult it is to take the T, or other issues that our local environments cause problems for us every single day? Just general hand. Yes, okay. So you, like me, care a lot about how cities operate. And so the Harvard Undergraduate Urban Sustainability Lab, or HUSTLE, was started to build a community of students who are interested in urban studies. And we really care a lot about this tie between the places that we live and the way that we can improve our worlds, right? Cities are centers of economic power, of sustainability, and of democracy in many ways. We get involved in our communities and feel a sense of agency from seeing those communities improve over time. And so HUSTLE was started to really build that connection between students and the work that they do, whether in housing or transit or sustainability or any other issue, and the cities and places that they live in. So we provide undergraduates with immediate ways to engage with those issues through our directly impactful working groups, where we partner with local and national urban organizations. We've been able to win on very cool things like pedestrianization in Harvard Square, like opening, yes, multifamily housing in Cambridge and other issues in the Boston area. We've been able to collaborate with students at Boston University on a bike summit. Just this past week, students at BU and other advocates in the Boston area were able to go to Boston City Council and push for transportation improvements. So this is a really big movement for students that has been building up over the past few years, where we have really gotten involved in the cities. We often hear that students are not, taking time, stepping out of campus and things like that. But we actually do see that people want to get involved here at Harvard and elsewhere. And so I've been really grateful to be able to co-lead the Urban Sustainability Lab along with my co-president Gavin, who's not here today. But in terms of, I have 2 asks, one for students and one for other members of our community. For students, get involved in Hustle in a number of different ways. We have our Instagram up there and then our QR code. We do a number of working groups, as I mentioned, but we also do socials and other community events. And it really underscores, again, this aspect of democracy. If you have felt the need to get mobilized in the Boston and Cambridge area, like me, from hearing so many of our wonderful speakers speak today, this is one of the organizations that you can get involved in, where you can get directly into the Cambridge and Boston area, connect with people from many different backgrounds, as we've been able to do with some of our big events over the past year, including a Cambridge City Council candidate forum, where we were able to speak to prospective and incumbent candidates for Cambridge City Council about the need for standing up to Trump and authoritarianism. If you are not a student, but you're a member of our community, this QR code still links to our mailing list, where we provide newsletters and things like that, so you can hear about information going on in the Boston area. If you are also interested in any connection between urbanism and the issue that you care about, please come talk to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you. But yeah, we are really grateful to be able to collaborate with Harvard Students for Freedom on things like standing up to Trump. We were able to do an election workshop on how to run for office with Students for Freedom and Run for Something, which is a progressive organization getting young people into office. So many different connections between the places that we live and students on campus. Yes, please come talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive, and shout out to pedestrians. Up next, we have Lauren Barnes, who is here to talk to us about the Crimson Alliance for Survivors of Sexual Assault. Lauren Barnes is a proud wife, mother, and mid-career master's in public administration student. She is also a survivor of sexual abuse and a court-appointed special advocate for children in foster care back home in Texas. Please welcome Lauren.
Thank you. I know we're way over time and I talk really fast, so just bear with me. Professor Gans asked me earlier a little bit about my parents. My dad was a builder and my mom was a painter. Neither of them graduated from college. Literally never thought I would speak before a Harvard audience in any capacity, even if it is 9:16 on a Friday night, or attend here as a college student. So thank you guys for being here and making this space. As mentioned, I'm still working on saying out loud that I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and I want to talk about what Dr. Fung talked about earlier, which is the deep ties to the Epstein class on our campus. This has been something that's been really hard for myself and other survivors on campus, opening up old wounds and just also the hurt from the silence from the administration on these ties. But I've also found so incredibly much hope in the students and faculty and staff that have really come together about this issue. So we are newly branded the Crimson Alliance for Survivors. So thank you again for being here with us today. What started as just kind of an informal group of students talking about the ties when the news with Larry Summers came out and then Leslie Wexner, it started to get to the point where you couldn't ignore it on campus anymore, and we came together to figure out what we could do about it. So I'll talk just a little bit about what we've been up to and how you can get involved. Sorry, I'm saying way too much. But yesterday we held a really powerful event with Dr. Farmer, who is an Epstein survivor, and Ashley Judd, who is an actress, advocate, and author. We all know and love her, to really begin the conversation about these ties on campus and what would institutional courage look like? What would repair look like? And the New York Times article that came out on Tuesday lays out a lot of what these links are. I would encourage you to read it later if you haven't already seen it, but I wanted to share just 3 of the names, of the many names that we touched on yesterday. As I mentioned, Larry Summers is the former Harvard president and Secretary of Treasury. He maintained a deep, close friendship with Epstein until the day before his final arrest in 2019. After this was found out in the fall, he continued teaching and was still the head of a research center at HKS. David Gergen was the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership at HKS. He also maintained a friendship with Epstein until at least 2016. Lastly, Leslie Wexner. Wexner donated $42 million to Harvard Kennedy School, and much of that money when Epstein was managing his foundation. The main building that every visitor that I have to walk my child under bears his name. Every single guest has to come through that. I don't think we've done a tally yet, but his name is probably on at least 30 different classrooms, directional signs where we eat our meals. It is absolutely everywhere. Virginia Giuffre, testified that she was sexually abused by Wexner on multiple occasions. Dr. Farmer's sister, Maria Farmer, testified in a separate lawsuit that she was assaulted by Epstein at Wexner's Ohio estate, and his security kept her there for hours after while she was frantically trying to flee. Congressman Robert Garcia said, "We should be very clear. There would be no Epstein Island, there would be no Epstein plane, there would be no money to traffic women and girls. Mr. Epstein would not be the wealthy man he was without the support of Les Wexner." We followed the university's official denaming process and submitted a proposal on March 13th. We still have heard nothing besides we received it. They did give a very rare comment to the New York Times in this article, and that's the only time I've seen them speak about it yet. In the review process that Harvard outlines, there's no timeline, there's no transparency, there's no inclusion process. This is a theme that I'm hearing across organizing events at Harvard, is no matter what your connection is, you want more transparency, you want inclusion. And we're asking Harvard to meet us with what this moment demands, and that looks like institutional courage. Again, we're asking for transparency, inclusion, and a time-bound review process, not just for the denaming proposal, but for the broader Epstein investigation that they're doing. There was a 2020 report, and I might get in trouble for noting this. President Garber was the chair of the Gift Policy Committee during this time, and in that 2020 report, many of these links, despite the evidence and the news articles that were out there and what should have been known, were not included in that report. We did a survey before our event among HKS affiliates just to get their opinion on what they think is going on and what they want to do about it. 90% of the survey respondents want Wexner's name down, but just as important, 85% are demanding transparency. I think everyone in this room knows that the Justice Department is deeply broken, whether that's their attacks on Harvard or how they've handled the Epstein files. According to the new IOP, the Institute of Politics survey that came out this week, 15% of young Americans don't have trust in the federal government. And I really believe that what Harvard does in this moment doesn't just send a signal to survivors on campus, it sends a signal to the whole world about what we value and who we choose to platform. I did want to note one thing that my good friend Karina brought up this week, that tomorrow will be 1 year since Virginia Giuffre passed away. I wanted to close with a quote from her book and then a quick moment of silence before I try to quickly finish the remarks. Virginia said, "Each one of us can make positive change. I truly believe that. I hope for a world which predators are punished, not protected. Victims are treated with compassion, not ashamed, and powerful people face the same consequences as anyone else. We don't live in this world yet, but I believe we could someday. Imagining is the first step." Do the quickest moment of silence since we're over time. But thank you for being here. Again, I know it's late, but just by showing up, it shows that you care about this university, you care about what it means to be a student, alumni, faculty, staff. And again, we know what Harvard does sends a signal much broader than that. If you want to get involved with us, I would highly encourage you to sign up for our emails. We're going to have really specific actions on how you can get involved. And then we're also have a team for this Sunday morning if you happen to be free and want to go to the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, walk with us. We would love to have you. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you so much. Let's give it up one more time. All right, now I would like to welcome Melanie Garcia to the stage. Melanie is a Harvard student studying government and ethnicity, migration, and rights with a passion for immigrant justice and community organizing. She is here to tell us about the Monarch Market Coalition, which is a slide that is not here. Melanie, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie. I'm a junior here studying government and ethnicity and migration rights. I'm the co-president of RASA, the Mexican Student Association, the community organizing chair at the Phillips Brooks House Association, PBHA, and I'm an organizer with the Harvard Undergraduate Monarch Coalition. So the Monarch Coalition is a coalition of Harvard students organizing for immigrant justice. In February, we hosted a concert and market fundraiser to raise mutual aid funds to support Cambridge and Boston area community members struggling with legal fees and other costs associated with ICE's brutal campaign. In February, we raised over $2,000, and we are hosting another one, this time outdoors, next week on Thursday, April 30th, from 3:30 to 5:30, just inside Harvard Yard, outside of the Phillips Brooks House. The Harvard Undergraduate Monarch Coalition is composed of over 10 student organizations, including RASA, the Student Labor Action Movement, Latinas Unidas, Amnesty International, and more. And at our markets, we celebrate community, art, and resistance while raising awareness around the current violence being inflicted on immigrant, Black, and Brown communities across the country. Our markets feature student performances. The last one had performances by Mariachi Veritas, Kumba, and the Didentonics. And we have food sold by groups. We're gonna have empanadas and Mexican street corn, so it's very yummy food. And we also have original art and prints sold by students. At our markets, we also share educational materials, actionable campaign information, like the National TPS campaign, safety materials, and we also offer students opportunities to get trained and connected to broader anti-ICE organizing on campus. Recently, we had an ICE Watch training, and we are currently organizing in support of the grad student strike, particularly around Article 13, which includes protections for non-citizen workers. We had an ICE off-campus art build just yesterday, right outside in the Science Center Plaza, and it was to build solidarity with the strike and to mobilize students to organize around the immigrant protections that the grad students are fighting for. So yeah, a lot of what we're working right now is just raising funds, mutual aid funds for community members at Harvard, Boston, and Cambridge, and working with the grad students to get some of the demands here on campus for Harvard to recognize the vulnerability of its immigrant students and workers and to give us the protections that we deserve. If you want to learn more, you can follow us on Instagram at Harvard Monarch, and you can DM us there with any questions or if you want to get involved. And also, please RSVP to the market happening next week, tinyurl.com/outdoormonarch. And again, it's next Thursday, 3:30 to 5:30 outside PBHA, and I hope to see all of you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. All right, finally, we have one final presentation for you, which is a video submitted by Representative Jamie Raskin. Representative Raskin represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the 119th Congress. And after this video, we will finally end with some closing remarks from James McCaffrey. Thank you all so much for being such a wonderful audience, and let's hear from our guy, Jamie.
Hey everybody, it's Jamie Raskin. Hello to all my friends at Students for Freedom and Crimson Courage. Thank you for your organizing. Thank you for putting this conference on. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, and also forgive my sunglasses. I just had a little eye procedure, and so I'm adjusting to the light. In any event, I want to thank you guys for what you're doing. You know that this is essential. We're in the fight of our lives right now to defend constitutional democracy and freedom in America against a full-blown authoritarian push. And a lot of it began with the attack on colleges and universities, with the attack on law firms and their ability to represent who they want and to still be able to go into federal courthouses and buildings, the attack on unions, the attack on civil society generally. But the fight with the universities and colleges has been a critical one. And we know that they've been attacking foreign students, any students who veer from the MAGA party line. We know that they want to be able to control faculty hiring. They want to be able to control curriculum. They want to be able to control student admissions at colleges and universities across the country. And I'm grateful that President Garber took a very strong stand when this nightmare started. The institutions, whether they're law firms or colleges or universities or unions that have stood up to mega authoritarianism, are the ones who have been vindicated by events. We are winning all over the country, and also will be vindicated by history. And those who have caved in and buckled under will go down in some disgrace if they don't turn things around rather quickly. And there are a lot of law firms and a lot of universities that did not acquit themselves well when the most basic principles of academic freedom were violated and assaulted, and the most basic principles of the First Amendment were under attack. And where does all of it end? Well, if you let them continue with their rampage against the Bill of Rights, it ends up in scenes like we saw in Minneapolis with Alex Preddy and Renee Good, with U.S. citizens being gunned down at point-blank range in the streets just for exercising their First Amendment rights. So this is one general struggle to defend civil society, from Harvard University to Minneapolis to the TV networks and Jimmy Kimmel. We've got to stand up for everybody's right of free speech and the ability of institutions to govern themselves and not to be controlled and ruled by Donald Trump and the mega authoritarians who surround him. So thank you guys for hanging tough. Remember what Tom Paine said when he wrote The American Crisis. I'll update the language a little bit so it doesn't offend modern sensibilities, but he said, "These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone that stands with us now will win the love, the favor, and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. Let's make that victory ours in 2026 and beyond. And thank you for everything you're doing, Students for Freedom and Crimson Courage."
Thank you, Congressman. And overall, thank you all for being here. I want to give a big round of applause for Olivia Data for emceeing. And thank you all for being here. I hope you're able to gain something from this, and hope we're able to apply this knowledge and create some power from it. But over at Democracy House, we have a bunch of Felipes and some drinks if anybody wants to come on, do the walk on over. It's like a 5-7 minute walk or something. And I will see you all there. Thank you.